Prostitution has existed since time immemorial, so any move to completely outlaw it is bound to fail. So let me ask something controversial. Is it time to legalise it?
On your radio, on the LBC app, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 7 o'clock, a criminal investigation has been launched into allegations Lord Mandelson passed market-sensitive information to the paedophile financier Jeffrey Epstein. The former Labour minister's quitting the House of Lords tomorrow after emails in the Epstein files suggested he shared market-sensitive details. Sir Keir Starmer says it's the right move as Lord Mandelson let his country down. Conservative leader Kemi Badenoch thinks the Prime Minister has too.
The Prime Minister has his fingerprints all over this. He knew all of the allegations, concerns and reports about Peter Mandelson, knew that he was a close friend and associate of a convicted paedophile, and he still gave him the biggest job in the Foreign Office.
Lib Dem leader Sir Ed Davey says there should be an inquiry into his appointment as ambassador to the US.
Well, there'll be senior civil servants, people in number 10, the Prime Minister's chief advisor, Morgan McSweeney, and there may be others, to make sure people who have really done our country a disservice are held to account.
Philip Norton, Lord Norton, is a professor of government. He told LBC, after tomorrow, Peter Mandelson can still call himself a lord.
There's a distinction between membership and peerage, so you have to be a peer in order to be a member of the House of Lords, but they are distinguishable. Under the 2014 House of Lords Reform Act, peers can now retire, so they can choose to leave the House. They cease to be members, but it has no bearing on their title. They retain their peerage.
Prince Edward's become the first member of the royal family to comment on the latest Epstein revelations.
It's all really important always to remember the victims and who are the victims in all this. A lot of victims in this.
He was speaking on CNN during a summit in Dubai. Some experts are saying the Epstein story is bigger than the Profumo scandal that rocked the Tory government in the 1960s. Private Eye editor Ian Hislop told Tonight with Andrew Marr it could have been prevented from happening.
Profumo broke and exploded. This one's been going for a very long time, and everyone involved pretends they had absolutely no idea. Keir Starmer, all his advisors, all these businessmen, everyone's saying we had no idea that Epstein was in some way a paedophile. Whereas, in fact, 2008 is the date of the case. We ran a cover about this in 2011.
In other news, a 15-year-old boy has been charged with the murder of a 16-year-old in Wiltshire. Shane Hambakasher was stabbed in Chippenham on Saturday. Earlier, his father paid tribute to a brave and bold young man. There'll be a formal investigation into Elon Musk's X and its chatbot, Grok, for its creation of sexualised deepfake images. X says it's made changes to prevent this happening. Spain's Prime Minister says he plans to bring in a social media ban to protect under-16s. In France, there'll be a ban from September. It's already in place in Australia. The US military shot down an Iranian drone that approached its aircraft carrier in the Arabian Sea. The vessel is part of an American military build-up as President Trump mulls whether to strike Iran again. Iran's supreme leader has warned the United States that if they start a war, this time it will be a regional war. In the last half hour, it's been confirmed 2 men have died in a light aircraft crash near Rochdale. The plane came down near farmland at Littleborough. Earlier, LBC's Chris Chambers described the scene.
This is around a mile or so from the main road. It's really windy. The visibility isn't great as well. And wrapped around the base of an electricity pylon, there is a huge yellow parachute. And in the undergrowth, the small white plane can be seen upside down with its wheels in the air.
And violent and extremist inmates will be kept in US-inspired supermax prisons under new government plans. The Justice Secretary says the measures in England and Wales follow a review into an attack on guards at Frankland Jail in County Durham. In the city, the FTSE 100 closed down 26 points at 10,314. The pound buys $1.37 and €1.16. LBC weather. Rain moving northwards, turning to snow on higher hills. Windy in the north and cold. Clearer further south with some showers. Lows of -1 to 4 Celsius. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Matt Hewitt.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening. 5 minutes past 7 is the time on LBC. Don't forget you can watch our entire programme now by going to Global Player, the LBC app or the LBC YouTube channel, all 3 hours for your delectation. Now, Peter Mandelson is still dominating the headlines today for obvious reasons, not least because this afternoon it was announced by the Lord Speaker that Peter Mandelson, as of tomorrow, would not be a member of the House of Lords. But he can't actually resign from the peerage. So there still has to be an Act of Parliament, can you believe? So that's one development today. Downing Street have also referred all of this to the Metropolitan Police, and they're investigating now whether charges should be laid. And the longer you spend looking at these charges, the more convinced you become that they have no alternative but to launch a proper investigation, and that he will be charged and possibly, if he's found guilty, go to prison. Now, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that this has all the makings of a political scandal that is the biggest that has hit this country since the Profumo scandal of the early 1960s, when the Secretary of State for War, John Profumo, was sent to prison, for all sorts of reasons to do with, essentially lying to Parliament, treachery, corruption, and probably a lot more besides. And this scandal, I think, is interesting to most people because it combines both sex and finance. I think financial scandals people often sort of expect in politics, but because of the Epstein angle to this, he's a convicted paedophile. That adds another aspect to it, a very unsavoury aspect. And I was reading the interview that Peter Mandelson did with Katie Balls for The Times, which most of it was done on the 25th of January, so before all of this really happened. And it's the most extraordinary interview. There is no self-reflection. There is no self-knowledge. There is no understanding that this is it for Peter Mandelson. There is no return. There is no comeback that is possible for Peter Mandelson after all of this, however any court case might go. He thinks he's been treated unfairly. Unbelievable. The other person that I think we've got to talk about today is Keir Starmer, because his judgment is coming under question, and also that of his chief advisor, Morgan McSweeney. And a lot of Labour MPs have got it in for him anyway, because they blame him for a lot of the strategic mistakes that the government has made. So there are suggestions that he might be out on his ear within a couple of days. Well, if that happens, Keir Starmer will have lost his most trusted advisor. And we all know what can happen to prime ministers when they lose their most trusted advisors. They don't often last very long. How has this scandal affected your view of Keir Starmer? How do you think his judgment has been over all of this? Because there are many people who are calling his judgment into question and questioning whether he's fit to remain as Prime Minister. Nigel Farage, you might say, well, he would say that, wouldn't he? But he's been probably leading the charge on that today. So lots to talk about. 0345 6060 973. LBC's Deputy Political Editor, Aggie Chambray, is with me. What have you been hearing from Labour MPs today? Because I imagine that you haven't found any that are thinking, oh, yes, we've handled all this rather well.
Well, you say that. There are some Labour MPs who actually think that the way Sir Keir Starmer has responded today has been pretty good. He was absolutely furious, it seems, in Cabinet. And the language he used was that he was appalled at the information that had emerged over the weekend in the Epstein files. He basically said that Peter Mandelson had let the country down. However, having said that, there are Labour MPs who are really worried and feel it's a bit of an own goal, the fact that Peter Mandelson was appointed ambassador in the first place. They're really angry with the political judgment of, yes, the Prime Minister, but also of his principal advisor, his chief of staff, Morgan McSweeney, too. One Labour MP saying to me tonight, who knew that Peter Mandelson would have caused a Labour Prime Minister such a headache? How utterly unforeseeable. Others basically saying people are furious, demanding to know why he was appointed. Ambassador Morgan has got to go. Now, a government spokesperson said Peter Mandelson wouldn't have been appointed if all the information we have now was available at the time. But this is going to run and run and run. I mean, in the last few minutes, we've had it confirmed that a criminal investigation has been launched into the allegations that Peter Mandelson passed market-sensitive information to Jeffrey Epstein. That's been confirmed by the Metropolitan Police. A government spokesperson said the government stands ready to provide whatever support and assistance the police need. But also on your point about him retiring from the House of Lords, it seems that Number 10 is still going to bring, or at least they are looking at bringing legislation, potentially within days, to strip Peter Mandelson of being a Lord, so he would no longer be Lord Mandelson, but also from that peerage. So although he's no longer a member of the House of Lords as of tomorrow, he still has that peerage.
Yeah. And in terms of the Opposition Day debate tomorrow, the Conservatives, I don't know how long this debate is going to last, but they're going to make maximum trouble for that. Kemi Badenoch will no doubt stick the knife in Prime Minister's questions. How should the Conservatives approach this, do you think, or how will they approach it?
Well, you know what, even Nigel Farage said earlier, even the Conservatives have a good idea every now and then. So I think from an opposition point of view, this seems like pretty good politics, to be honest. So the Conservatives are plotting a Commons vote tomorrow, basically trying to force information into the open on the vetting details, who knew what when, and more pressure effectively on Morgan McSweeney, yes, but also on the Prime Minister. And speaking of Nigel Farage, he did a press conference earlier today, and Nigel Farage had his say on how this scandal and how also other alleged criminality by current and former Labour MPs is reflecting on the Prime Minister.
In politics, you will always get the odd bad apple in a political party, but it would appear that in the case right now of this Prime Minister and his Chief of Staff, their errors of judgment, partly their errors of judgment, have led now to case after case after case. Difficult for somebody who was already the most unpopular Prime Minister in living memory. This deals yet a further blow. And so I still stick to the view that after May the 7th, when you see in Wales, for example, Labour that's dominated the place, going right back to Keir Hardie's time. Very difficult for me to think that Starmer will survive the summer if he even gets through to May the 7th.
So, of course, Nigel Farage would say that, but I think there are questions, as I say, about the judgment of the Prime Minister, why Peter Mandelson was appointed in the first place. Because if he wasn't, this would absolutely be a huge story. We would still be talking about this, but there, I don't think, would be questions. There'd be questions for other Labour politicians who'd worked very closely with Peter Mandelson over the years, and of that there are many, but not questions like this about so recently appointing him to such a pivotal role.
OK, thank you very much. That's Eke Chambray, LBC's Deputy Political Editor. Joining me also in the studio is Kevin Craig, Founder and Chief Executive of the public relations agency PLMR, who is a Labour candidate at the 2024 general election. Kevin, crisis management is, I guess, the sort of thing that you advise people on. What would be, having read that article in the Times by Peter Mandelson, or the interview with Peter Mandelson today, what would you advise him to do now? And I know you've known him over the years.
Yeah, there's nothing left for Peter to do, Ian. I thought you started the programme with a very eloquent articulation of how this could end up being a very significant political story historically, with the possibility, not based on speculation, but based on real emails that we've seen, which normally at this stage one says we mustn't comment until the proceedings, etc. But when you have evidence such as that, like you today, I fast-forwarded it, and I think it could become very serious. The issue, of course, is that he lied. He's lied to so many people in the Labour Party. He's let down 2 prime ministers. He's let down...
Well, you could argue 3 now.
Yeah. And he's also... I walked past a school named after his granddad this morning on the way to work, and I just thought, mate, what is Labour about what you've done, you know? And the reason he was brought back, and he was approved by many sides of the House, was that he had a relationship with a lot of people around Trump that was important at the time. Of course, the way it's worked out is not great. And of course, one expects Reform, Farage, Kemi to make political trouble. That's their job. But the reality is Mandelson has let down the Labour Party. He's lied, and he's paid the ultimate consequence. And it's what he's done. And I'm actually impressed, because I know you might say something to this, but the Prime Minister's been very fast once he found out what's going on. And that's something about Starmer. When something happens, I would argue, under the Tories, there's all this hanging on. Starmer's brutal. And I know that more than any, even when there's nothing to be seen. He's brutal in how fast he acts. And Mandelson lied to him. And we wouldn't know if it wasn't for the fact that the Epstein inquiry showed up emails from a now deleted account. And you've also, over the years as a journalist, had a lot to do with Mandelson and the allure of power and money. We all knew that. But when it could be set to work for the state to create jobs, it was a good thing. But it's so unpatriotic to leak emails when your country's dealing with a financial crisis.
It's also incredibly stupid when it was done at the time of the MP's expenses scandal. So all politicians ought to be on red alert for any implication that they could be sort of doing something that they shouldn't be.
Yes, you see, but Iain, a friend, I hasten to add, before the latest revelations, a few weeks ago, somebody I know had a 2-hour meeting with Mandelson, right? Before the latest Epstein, the revelations of the leaks and the alleged leaks and the information and going against the Prime Minister and all that. And he said that even then, Mandelson was thinking about a comeback. He was wronged. And the way you said it, no self-reflection. He had no understanding. He had to be forced to apologise to the victims of Epstein. And I know it's good politics for the others to get stuck into Starmer and Morgan McSweeney, who I've campaigned with in the past, but they were lied to. And when a senior person lies, as happens in politics, is what you do about it, not the fact that they did it in the first place.
But the vetting procedure when he became ambassador, I mean, clearly that was a farce.
Well, we don't know, of course, how much of this... I mean, my clear reading from today is that all the evidence that's come out in the last 48 hours was not known to anybody in the British government, whether civil service or politician, because it's only after that came out that you've seen how fast the PM reacted. There's no way on earth that Starmer would ever been appointed had the existence of those emails been known.
No, that is true. But you do wonder, I mean, given that Peter Mandelson has been around for a long time, there were lots of questions about his character anyway that we all knew. It makes you wonder what the security services were doing if they didn't sort of say to Starmer, well, hang on a minute, you do realise you're taking a bit of a risk here.
Well, I think it's fair and emotionally intelligent to say there is always risk in appointing somebody with Peter's record. But when you think about the dynamics and the importance of the Trump relationship at the time, it was received quite well by all sides of the House.
No,
but of course, everyone's an expert in retrospect.
And I would also say that in the 6 months that he was ambassador, he did a good job.
He was highly effective because of those networks. But, what he's done...
What should he do now, though? I mean, should he just effectively be silent and go to ground and not make any public comment at all?
Well, when you're faced with criminal charges, right, my strong advice to people is be quiet, get yourself good advice if you're innocent, and follow the due process, and in due course you will be cleared. There is no room for conducting this in the media. No one's interested. Nobody wants to hear from Mandelson. Nobody in the Labour Party. And from the top, from Downing Street down to CLP level, people are so angry with what he's done.
OK, Kevin, thank you very much indeed. That's Kevin Craig from the Public Relations Agency, PLMR. So, I mean, do you agree with Kevin that Starmer has actually handled this quite well? That he's been, I mean, there are other occasions where you could say he's been brutal. Getting rid of Sue Gray was one that you could add to the list, but there are probably a few other examples. Or do you think, no, he should never have appointed him in the first place? That is what this is all, in the end, that's what it comes down to. Although we would still be having these conversations if he hadn't been appointed, the fact that he was in the first place shows that Starmer is not fit to be Prime Minister. Is that your view? 0345 6060 973. It's 19 minutes past 7.
Weekdays from 7 a.m.
They have fatal incompetence.
Straight to the point.
What is the problem they've got over there?
Nick Ferrari at breakfast on LBC.
The country's going backwards. Growth down. Energy prices up.
Listen on our free Global Player app or the LBC app. Download it now from your app store. LBC.
Idle
is LBC with Iain Dale. Call 0345 6060 973.
21 minutes past 7 is the time here on LBC. Now, apparently, I said something which several of you have pointed out is incorrect. I said John Profumo went to prison. He didn't, but Christine Keeler did. So just want to clear that up. Sorry for that mistake. But I do think that it's entirely possible that this could result in a prison sentence, depending on what the charges are. But let's stick to what you think about Keir Starmer's judgment on this. A lot of Labour MPs, well, as Aggie was saying, some of them think that he's handled it quite well so far, and others think not. I think if you are somebody who's already against the Prime Minister, you will probably think this is another thing to add to the list of things that he shouldn't have done, i.e. appoint Mandelson in the first place. But as I said yesterday, hindsight is a wonderful thing, isn't it? Because I actually thought that the appointment was a good idea at the time. So I'll hold my hands up. I'll be one of those who clearly was wrong at the time. But if you wanted to appoint somebody who was a big hitter in international trade, knows the system, then Peter Mandelson was a good appointment. But we all know now that that wasn't the case. We'll come to your calls in a moment. Sir Peter Riddle joins us, former Commissioner for Public Appointments, who was also previously a political journalist with The Times, chief political commentator during much of the Blair years. Peter, very good evening. How did you find Peter Mandelson to deal with as a political journalist at the time?
He was always in play, if I can put it that way. You always knew he was spinning a line, but he was extremely clever. I had my differences with him from time to time, but I respected him. I thought he was a supreme professional. He was a major player in Labour's recovery from the depths of the 1983 election, working initially with Neil Kinnock. He was rather out when John Smith was leader. We didn't trust him. And then he came back very much with Tony Blair and had his ups and downs, and now a big down with Gordon Brown. But he was highly professional. And I felt, instead of reflecting your earlier comments, Ian, that he was someone he had clear personal flaws, a vanity, some respects a lack of self-awareness, but he was really good at his political job, rather underlining the point you made about when he was chosen as ambassador. I thought he would do a good job, despite his well-known personal flaws. So I found him a pro, someone I got on with and respected.
Now, you were also Commissioner for Public Appointments. Now, I don't think in that role you would have been deciding on ambassadors necessarily, but given your experience, do you think that the correct procedures were followed when he was appointed ambassador?
That's a very interesting question. You're quite right. I didn't do ambassadors. That was excluded. But one of the things I did used to plug away at all the time, especially when problems occurred, was due diligence, it is known. That you check up. I mean, the famous question I always used to say was, have you asked the embarrassment question? In an interview, 45 minutes an hour, they always should ask at the end of the interview, is there anything in what you're doing or whatever which would embarrass you or embarrass the role? And the British are very reluctant to ask the embarrassment question. Now, in this case, there's a particular twist. Two of the key officials had already given evidence to Emily Thornberry's Foreign Affairs Select Committee. They did it before Christmas. And they were asked, that was after the first lot of revelations, not the recent ones. And they both said, well, of course, it was a political appointment. And that's why there wasn't the usual due diligence. If it had been a professional civil servant, an ambassador, they'd have gone through very highly developed vetting procedures, as anyone in a sensitive post in the Foreign Office, Home Office, Defence, Cabinet Office are really heavily vetted for all their personal links. But he wasn't, because he was a political appointee. So I think that was short-circuited. And that, I think, will emerge as one of the big lessons, that not enough questions were asked. Now, I fully believe that a lot of what's been revealed in the last 48 hours or so was not known earlier. The question is, should it have been known? And should Peter Mandelson have been impressed and questioned more? I think that's inevitably one of the conclusions from this episode.
Katie Balls, I think, has got what will probably turn out to be the interview of the year, which she wrote it up in the Times today, the interview with Peter Mandelson, which was conducted on the 25th of January, but updated on Sunday. What would your advice to him be now? Because I was surprised that He went on the Koonsberg programme a couple of weeks ago, and very surprised that he gave that interview to Katie Balls. I mean, wouldn't his best advice be to just shut up?
Absolutely, but that's not Peter Mandelson. That I think that, as you were saying earlier, Ian, he has got a lack of self-awareness. Also, remember, this is his whole life. He's not someone who collects stamps or indulges in normal hobbies. He's not a great sports fan. He's not following West Ham or whatever. That's not his life. His politics is his life. He wants to be in the game. So I think to adjust, even though he's now in his early 70s, is a very difficult thing to do. And I think, obviously, presumably, the last 48 hours will have hit him very hard and will lead to the conclusion you've got to shut up. Also, now there is a criminal investigation with allegations made. I'm sure his lawyers will be saying, go to ground, don't say anything, which might compromise any trial, and generally, but I think it goes against his nature. His nature is always to be in play, to be fighting and battling away. And also, I think the contradiction about him has been, and it goes back to your earlier question, Ian, that he was remarkably shrewd of his analysis of politics and his advice to people like Tony Blair, Gordon Brown, whatever. He was never shrewd about himself, which is why he landed, he had to resign from the cabinet twice.
Yeah.
And he was never shrewd about himself. And he never asked questions about what am I doing, but he'd give very good advice to other people.
It's interesting. There have been 6 Labour prime ministers in British history. 7. And he's let down 3 of them. I mean, that must be when he puts his head on the pillow at night. I don't know whether he would even acknowledge that, but that's quite a burden to bear, isn't it?
Yes, interesting. No word yet from Tony Blair. Gordon Brown, understandably, is furious, and Gordon Brown and Peter Mandelson have had a very complicated relationship. And certainly from when Tony Blair emerged, Gordon Brown was all suspicious of Peter Mandelson, but of course he did bring him back to the cabinet, he brought him back from Brussels, and so on. He respected his talents. But yes, the 3 of them will feel bruised and let down, and understandably.
Peter, thank you very much indeed. That's Peter Riddle, former Commissioner for Public Appointments and former Chief Political Commentator for The Times. Gary's in Stockport. Hello, Gary.
Hi, Ian. How are you doing?
Good, thank you. What would you like to say?
Well, see, I come from the opposite side of slightly the opposite side of the political spectrum to you, that I would never, ever vote Conservative. I would only ever vote for Labour, Lib Dem, maybe the Green Party, but I just feel we've been so let down by Keir Starmer's lack of judgment on a multitude of decisions since he's taken power, and it's just very, very disappointing.
I mean, all prime ministers have to make probably dozens of decisions every day. Inevitably, some of them are going to be wrong, and they have to be held accountable for those. Absolutely right. But do you think that? I'm assuming you mean not appointing Peter Mandelson in the first place was a bad decision.
I think appointing Peter Mandelson in the first place was a bad decision, but it came on the back of appointing Sue Gray after we'd had that situation whereby we all thought, I was one of those people that thought everything that the Tories do is really bad. And, the Beergate situation with Keir Starmer, you thought, well, that's not quite as bad as what the Tories were doing. And then he goes and appoints Sue Gray within minutes of getting into government, and it just terrible decisions, and they seem to repeatedly make these terrible judgment calls.
Well, you see, again, on Sue Gray, in theory, that was a masterstroke to recruit her just as all of the Boris Johnson Partygate stuff was culminating. She had a very successful career in the civil service. She knows the way, or knew the way, that government worked, and that's what he needed, somebody who knew how to pull the levers of government. So, in theory, that was an inspired appointment. It didn't work out, it has to be said, but I'm not sure we know all the reasons for that yet.
Well, the problem is that it was all about optics. The whole thing was about optics. It didn't matter who you appointed, and I cannot believe that there was not a more talented person than Sue Gray, and how high profile that she was, in order that he would needed to have appointed her.
OK, Gary, thank you very much indeed. Keep your calls coming, 0345 6060 973. Let me just tell you who's on Cross Question in half an hour. The Reform UK MP for Runcorn and Helsby, Sarah Pochin. Gordon McKee, Labour MP for Glasgow South. Josh Babarinde, Liberal Democrat MP for Eastbourne. He's the party's president. And Lucy Fisher, Whitehall editor of the Financial Times. So they're here to answer your questions from 8 o'clock. In the meantime, it's 7:31, time to get the news headlines on LBC with Matt Hewitt.
A criminal investigation has been launched into allegations Lord Mandelson passed market-sensitive information to the paedophile financier Jeffrey Epstein. The former Labour minister's quitting the House of Lords after emails in the Epstein files suggest he shared confidential details. A US Navy fighter jet has shot down an Iranian drone that was approaching its aircraft carrier in the Arabian Sea. It threatens to ramp up tensions as America warns of possible military action in Iran. And a 15-year-old boy has been charged with the murder of a 16-year-old in Wiltshire. Shane Hambacher was stabbed in Chippenham on Saturday. LBC weather, rain moving northwards, turning to snow on higher hills in Wales, on the Pennines and in eastern Scotland. Windy in the north and cold. Clearer further south with some showers. Lows tonight of -1 to 4 Celsius.
This is LBC. To be Dale on LBC.
7:34 on LBC. Alison says, Ian, like your guest said, there were a lot of people who thought it was a good appointment. I never really liked him. There was always something about him. As for Nigel Farage having a go at Keir Starmer after reading what I have today on Dan Needle's X account, he has some serious questions to answer too. Well, I don't know what you're referring to there, but I might well have a look. Now, let's take another text before we go back to your calls. Marita says it's just another scandal until the next scandal, because the politicians will not do anything because it would be like marking their own homework. And in reality, this is most probably only the tip of the iceberg. Well, lots of sort of generalisations there. You say politicians won't do anything. Well, Keir Starmer has already said he's going to introduce legislation to ensure that disgraced peers can't keep their peerages. So that is doing something. Most politicians on either side of the House will have been appalled by this, because it brings them all into disrepute, because it just plays into this narrative that all politicians are the same, they're all on the make, and that's what many people have come to believe. It is not true, and I can sit here until I'm blue in the face and say that, and you'll just say, oh, well, you would say that because you're in with all of them. Well, I'm not, but I've over 40 years, I've come across some bad apples in politics, just as I'm sure you have in whatever kind of job you do. There always are bad apples. Human nature means inevitably that there will be bad apples in politics, just as there are in the world of teaching or the health service or in private business. Let's go to Seamus in Wallington. Hi, Seamus.
Sorry. Good evening to you, Ian.
Well, shall I come back to you, Seamus?
I'm all right, actually. I was choking on my own words here.
Okay.
I guess we get the politicians we deserve. I'd like to make a couple. It's really important that we know what did Keir Starmer know in terms of vetting and security services. And I think we both know we'll never get the truth on that. We just won't be told. But we get what we deserve. It's a shame, but we get what we deserve.
Well, I think you're right in some ways, because Peter Mandelson, whatever his situation is now, anyone in politics, whether they're Conservative, Labour, Lib Dem, Reform, they will recognise that over the last 3 decades, despite all the flaws, despite all the errors, Peter Mandelson has actually been a very skillful politician in many ways. It takes something to come back from 2 cabinet resignations, for example. Now, that wasn't just patronage, because I think anybody that encountered Peter Mandelson, either as Northern Ireland Secretary or Trade Secretary, knew that he was actually very good at the job. And the fact that he made one catastrophic error of judgment, the second one he was actually proved right on, and probably should never have been sacked by Tony Blair. But leaving that one to one side, he was a successful EU commissioner. So he's not an untalented individual. But the character flaws have basically ruined him on 3 different occasions.
Ian, sorry to interrupt you. One of the things I'm really interested in what's come out is what was his role in the ending of Gordon Brown's government, and was he involved in actually sabotaging his premiership? And that is acting against the interest of your party and your country, and then sharing that information with external foreign business people for financial gain. It's reprehensible.
Well, that is. I don't agree with you that he was trying to bring down Gordon Brown. He came back into that government totally unexpectedly. He certainly didn't expect it. And I think, again, he was appointed business secretary. Most people think he did quite a good job in that. But you can't, if you're business secretary, you can't go around sending private little billets doux to foreign business people, particularly when they've just come out of jail. Sorry, I got your disease now. Coming out of jail for what he was convicted for, the sort of trafficking. So his role in the end of the government, I mean, I don't know what advice he gave to Gordon Brown as to whether he should continue and try and form another government or not. But I don't think he was crucial in all those discussions. There were plenty of other people in the room, as Andrew Adonis, Alistair Campbell have reported on in the past. Thank you very much indeed, Seamus. Glenn says, Peter Mandelson let the country down, but I always question Sir Keir Starmer, Captain U-Turn's political judgment all the time. Why does he always make the mistake before he turns around? Who advises him? Well, that's a question that a lot of Labour MPs are asking, Glenn, and the clear answer is that his chief political advisor, his chief of staff, is Morgan McSweeney, the man who succeeded Sue Gray. So he's coming under a lot of criticism tonight, just over the road in Parliament, because a lot of Labour MPs want to see him gone. Keir Starmer will fight tooth and nail to make sure that doesn't happen. Dan is in Newham. Hi, Dan.
Hi, thanks for taking the call. So I think for years we were being told that Keir Starmer is studying forensic. And the thing is, I think a lot of people knew Peter Mandelson's relationship to Epstein for years, to the point that I knew, because I read it in the New York Times in 2019, that Peter Mandelson actually phoned Epstein when he's in jail and for a favour. And I think if people like the public know these kinds of things, why is Keir Starmer appointing someone who's very close friends with a notorious paedophile to represent England on the world stage? So I think Keir Starmer kind of does need to resign, and I think it comes down to as chief of staff, Morgan McSweeney, because he, I believe, had a very close relationship with Mandelson. And I think maybe that's where the pressure comes from.
Yes, I think that's true. From what I understand, it was Morgan McSweeney who suggested Peter Mandelson as a new ambassador. And clearly Keir Starmer was persuaded by that. But I think you make an incredibly good point. I mean, I have to say, I wasn't aware of his relationship with Epstein. I'm not sure until all the recent revelations that I even knew who Epstein was. But you're right, looking back, there were all sorts of telltale signs that somebody in the Downing Street operation or somebody in the security services ought to have alerted Keir Starmer to. And I don't think that is looking at things with hindsight.
No, exactly. And I just want to make another point, if that's okay. I was listening to Andrew Marr yesterday, and he brought up the point he believes that it could potentially be a Russian honey trap operation. But I was looking through a lot of the files, and the FBI investigators believe that Trump was actually compromised by Israel, and they were running the honey trap operation. And if you look in the files, I believe Israel was mentioned more times than Trump, like more than 3,000 times, and there's correspondence between the Prime Minister of Israel and the ex-Prime Minister of Israel and Epstein. So, well,
that is true. I mean, what was his name? Ehud Barak. We know because of the previous round of emails, and there's been pictures of him on this island that he used to take people to. So I don't think that comes as a massive surprise. But I mean, Barak, when was it? I can't remember when he was Prime Minister of Israel, but it must be quite a few years ago now.
Exactly, yeah. And I think it's something that's kind of been missed out in the media a bit, and I would urge journalists to have a look at.
Yeah, well, look, there was apparently, was it 3 million emails, 3 million documents, something like that? Was it 6 million? One of the 3 million pages in 6,000. There's 6,000 documents that I think mention Mandelson's, and I don't think anybody's actually read all of them yet. So who knows what else is to come? Thank you very much indeed. Let's go to Adam in St Albans. Adam, hi.
Hi, Ian. Good evening. Going back to Mandelson, where we have been, realistically, the guy's had a really 40-year run with Labour of quite an extraordinary type of support for Labour, and a lot of the people in Labour have looked up to him. That's why he's obviously got our one foot.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely that's right. I think.
The third bump here has done a Prince Andrew on him, basically, where they've had to sort of decapitate him, and we go from there. But if we looked at him, he was there, communications. He's the guy, is as smooth as silk, but very frayed around the edges. He was one of those that created the Spin Doctor back in 90 with Neil Kinnock, did very well there. So we've got a long history of him doing a good job. He went a little bit missing in John Smith's leadership from 92 to 94, and I'm leading up to something. Then come out the shadows to move in to Tony Blair. On the Tony Blair situation going forward, he's one of the few people that brought the term New Labour in. Now, as you mentioned in your pre-C earlier, where's Tony Blair's situation or verse or anything, any comments he wishes to make on it? Now, to me, that's speaking volumes, but I feel Tony Blair is a very, very clever, astute, basically, politician.
Yeah, and that's why he said nothing.
Absolutely correct. And going on to, I've got to say this as well, poor Peter, he looked like on that what's the name? The interview he had, it was like Prince Andrew with Emilis Mattis. They don't believe they're doing wrong. This is where they've come.
Oh no, he thinks in this. There was an article I read. Was it the Times interview? I think he's basically accused Starmer of throwing him under the bus.
Yes. But there's one other thing I must add here, Ian, and it's very, very important here. This could be Keir Starmer's 15th turnaround. The other 14th may have been by basically the electorate's this unhappiness with what's happened, but this is the Labour Party. It's palpable how upset they are. The words from John McDonnell earlier were caustic on it. They are very, very upset with Mandelson. They're fearing, I think, John mentioned, bringing it down.
It's hardly a surprise that John McDonnell would be very critical of Mandelson. He has been ever since he's been involved in Labour politics. So the left of the Labour Party will think, well, we told you so. This is always an accident waiting to happen. But the people on the sort of Blairite wing of the Labour Party, you could say the Starmerite wing of the Labour Party, I mean, they are going to feel incredibly let down.
Of course. But unfortunately, as you rightly said earlier, we didn't know of this Epstein chappie anyway at all, and it has come out of bombshells. And what's going on here will be up there with Profumo. This is treasonable. This is letting down everyone in our country, front-running with information given to Epstein in the markets. I was in the business. I was in the city as a major trader. And this information you get was up there with like the ERM in certain situations when the power collapsed, certain other situations. Intervention areas coming in can make people a lot of money.
OK, Adam, thank you very much indeed. Mandy says, I feel sick to my stomach over this Mandelson scandal. My husband and I are almost broken running our business, working 7 days a week, paying exorbitant amounts of tax, and all these so-called politicians have their noses in the trough. The wastage of my hard-earned tax is completely sickening, and no one in government cares one iota. If this was me, I'd be struck off and probably jailed, and we're chasing around this issue. I honestly want to leave this country. Well, that's very depressing, Mandy. I'm really sorry that you feel like that, but I feel your pain. 7:47.
LBC this morning on Nick Ferrari at breakfast.
Lord Mandelson, the latest developments there, possible police involvement, possible passing on of sensitive information. Catherine Baroness MacLeod, who was Special Advisor to Alistair Darling while he was Chancellor at the time when these emails were allegedly passed on.
Well, I don't know if we sold secrets to Epstein. We certainly gave them away, and I think it's reprehensible.
Minister for Secondary Care at the Department of Health, Karen Smith.
I think we're all shocked about the revelations in those emails, and it is right that the Prime Minister took action to make sure the Cabinet Secretary does investigate.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Back tomorrow morning from 7. Listen on our free Global Player app or the LBC app.
When you
Britain's conversation. Iain Dale. Alexa, send a comment to LBC.
10 to 8 on LBC. In 10 minutes, I'll be joined in the studio for Cross Question by the Reform UK MP Sarah Pochin, Gordon McKee, Labour MP for Glasgow South, Josh Baberinda, Liberal Democrat MP for Eastbourne. He's also President of the Liberal Democrats, and Lucy Fisher, Whitehall Editor of the Financial Times. So if you've got a question for the panel, you know the number by now, don't you? But I'll give it to you anyway. 0345 6060 973. Albert says, Starmer is totally incompetent, and like many issues, he simply turns a blind eye to things, and furthermore, like many people, believes that he should be replaced internally. I think he means I believe he should be replaced internally for the sake of British politics. Right, let's go to William, who's a new caller in Milton Keynes. William, very good evening. What would you like to say?
Hi, Ian. You're all right, mate?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I've just got strong feelings about Peter Mandelson. Like, obviously, I'm not gonna swear on air, but do you know what I mean? It's just like that's how angry I am.
Why?
Well, so how he was leaking government business to Epstein, right? And the economy was collapsing. So it annoys me because I was quite young back then. But I remember around the time when my dad was made redundant, and a lot of people around the country were losing their jobs because the economy wasn't doing great. And then here's sleazy Mandelson, passing secrets to Epstein. It just frustrates me that, this hasn't been dealt with severe consequences in my life.
Well, hang on a minute. We only found out about these emails on Sunday. Nobody knew about them before.
No, I know, but I'm talking about, how, was it last year that his connection was sort of established?
Well, yes, but there was no evidence of any of this kind of behaviour.
Mm.
I mean, you can't. I mean, what you're effectively saying is, well, yeah, we know it now, but we should have known it earlier. But we didn't know it earlier. But even then, we should have taken action. Well, that doesn't follow. I get why you're angry. I think everybody's angry. No one likes to see somebody doing something which is effectively not just a betrayal of the government that they're serving in, of the Prime Minister that they serve under and who appointed them, but also a betrayal of the country. I mean, it is scandalous that anybody could think that passing financial secrets to a foreign business person, let alone somebody who had already been convicted of a very serious criminal offence and had served a prison sentence, I mean, that would be bad enough just on its own. But the fact that he did it knowing all of these things, and we now know that because we've seen the emails, and this is why normally in these situations when a police investigation has started, I would have to do my job and say, look, you've got to be careful about making these allegations. Now, he hasn't been arrested or charged, so we're still free to say roughly what we like. But the fact is, we've seen the evidence.
Do you think this stands as treason?
Well, there is, unfortunately, the Blair government, I think in about 2002, abolished the whole concept of treason, so that there is no such offence anymore. I think that's regrettable because I think it should still exist. It is treasonous, yes. I'll say that, absolutely.
I just think that there needs to be some sort of maybe not so, I don't know how to explain it, but just sort of like there needs to be sort of an extreme response to, and obviously you are right, to be fair, I didn't really think about that, how we've only learned about it this Sunday, but I think instead of all this dancing around everything, because he's just going to get scot-free like all the politicians do.
Well, I genuinely don't think that's going to happen. I really, really don't. And again, you've said something there which is a gross generalisation. Do you know how many MPs have gone to prison over the last 15 years?
I actually don't.
Well, I think I'm right in saying that it's 11. It was mainly to do with the MP's expenses scandal, but I'm pretty sure, I mean, it's multiple anyway. I'm sure I saw that figure somewhere recently. So they don't always get off scot-free. There are consequences. A lot of them, if they've done something wrong, they have lost their jobs, they have been sacked, and it's just not right to say that they do these things with impunity and there are no consequences. William, thank you. Jennifer is a new caller in Bromley. Jennifer, hi.
Oh, hi, Ian. I think most people are kind of coming at this from a very similar direction, but I just want to make a really simple point, because sometimes simplicity is what's needed in these circumstances. Anyone who is working in any professional body, any financial service, of which is a considerable proportion probably of your listeners, but also the backbone tax-paying public of the UK, doesn't have any room to make any of the sort of behavioural choices that are being made. And I think you said something a little bit earlier around, there are bad apples in every enterprise. But I think the minimum we deserve as tax-paying, honest, hard-working people in the public is for the people who represent us to hold themselves first and foremost, but the whole of the enterprise and the institution of Parliament to a higher standard. And if professional bodies wouldn't tolerate this, then the standard should be higher than that. And I just don't think we're getting what actually, I know you say you get the politicians you deserve, but I really fundamentally don't think we're getting the politicians we deserve. And I really think we should all be expecting better.
Well, maybe more good people need to stand for Parliament. I think that is part of the problem, in that because of the way that politics has developed, because of the way that the media has developed over the last, well, not just 10 years, 15, 20, 30, you can go back a very, very long time. A lot of good people are put off standing for Parliament for very obvious reasons, and I can't say I blame them.
No, and I can fully sympathise with that, but even in the sense and the intrusion of the media and even the political sense in which some of these allegations, or even then ultimately the verdicts are called before any criminal investigation comes through, is very unfortunate. But there is something about the need to have a very strong moral fibre and a moral backbone from the people who represent us. And I agree with you. It's a shame. It's not a particularly attractive proposition, I think, for a number of well-intentioned and intelligent people who could help drive the country forward. But something has gone very wrong. And I think it's really important that those in power are looking at what is that and how do they clean themselves up, because otherwise the faith in the entire thing is going to be destroyed.
Jennifer, wise words. Thank you very much indeed. Ricky says, wow, Trump's name is in the Epstein files 38,000 times. We have the main perpetrator inflicting Nazi chaos on our closest ally, and all you can talk about is Mandelson and how it's all Starmer's fault. I haven't quite said that. All politicians leak. Get a grip, Ian, and address the main danger in the world. Well, listen, I reckon since Donald Trump became president, around 50%, probably more, of our programmes have devoted at least an hour to Donald Trump. So I'm not taking any lectures on that one, Ricky. Right, coming up in the next hour, I'm sure the subject of Peter Mandelson will come up in cross-question with Sarah Pochin, Reform MP for Runcorn and Helsby, Gordon McKee, Labour MP for Glasgow South, Josh Babarinde, Liberal Democrat MP for Eastbourne, he's the party's president, and Lucy Fisher, Whitehall editor of the Financial Times. They're here to answer your questions, and of course you can watch us in glorious Technicolor on Global Player, the LBC app, and the LBC YouTube channel. We're waiting for your questions. Get them in early, 0345 6060 973. You can WhatsApp us on that number as well, and text 84850.
On your radio, on the LBC app, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 8 o'clock, police have opened an investigation into claims Lord Mandelson passed on market-sensitive information to convicted paedophile Jeffrey Epstein. The 72-year-old was Gordon Brown's business secretary at the time in 2009. Kevin Craig, chief executive of the PR firm PLMR, told LBC that Peter Mandelson shouldn't make any comment now.
When you're faced with criminal charges, my strong advice to people is be quiet, get yourself good advice. If you're innocent, and follow the due process, and in due course you will be cleared. There is no room for conducting this in the media. No one's interested. Nobody wants to hear from Mandelson. From the top, from Downing Street down to CLP level, people are so angry.
A 15-year-old boy is being charged with murder over the stabbing of another teenager in Wiltshire. Shane Hambackerchair died in hospital after being attacked in Chippenham on Saturday. 2 men have died in a light aircraft crash in Greater Manchester. It crashed in a field near Rochdale this morning. And Birmingham City Council's leader says the city's no longer bankrupt. The government had to step in over 2 years ago to help run it. The authority had a multi-million-pound bill after being found to be underpaying female employees. In the city, the FTSE 100's closed down 26 points at 10,314. The pound buys $1.37 and €1.16. LBC weather, rain moving northwards, turning to snow on higher ground in the west. Clearer further south with showers, a low of -1. From Global's newsroom, for LBC, I'm Daryl Jackson.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening. It's 8:02 on LBC. Now, here's an incentive for you to watch as opposed to just listen to our panel tonight. I reckon I'm going to be choosing my words very carefully here. I won't use the word that I did describe them to Corey earlier. This is the best looking panel we've ever had in 8 years of Cross Question.
Wow, that's amazing.
Now, you don't get a compliment like that every day of the week, do you? Guys and girls. Anyway, let me tell you who they are. Next to me is Lucy Fisher, the Whitehall editor of the Financial Times. Next to her is Gordon McKee, Labour MP for Glasgow South. To my right, Sarah Pochin, Reform UK MP for Runcorn and Helsby. And next to her, Josh Babarinde, the Liberal Democrat MP for Eastbourne, who has recently been elected as the party's president. So they're here to take your calls on 0345 6060 973. And of course, as I say, do watch us on Global Player, the LBC app, or the LBC YouTube channel.
Call 0345 6060 973. Text 84850. Cross Question. Watch live on both Global Player and the new LBC app. This is LBC.
Right, well, let's start off with the text question. You won't be surprised what the subject of it is. It's from Andrew in Fulham, who I'm sure is equally gorgeous. Given the Peter Mandelson debacle, should it now be the case that if you resign or are sacked for wrongdoing from a cabinet position, you should not be allowed back into high office in this country? Gordon McKee.
Well, look, the first thing to say is I think Peter Mandelson is a disgrace. I've been disgusted and appalled by what I've read in the Epstein files, not just this weekend, but in the last few months and last few weeks as well, whether it's the emails that are cringeworthy, whether it's the photographs of him in his underpants or the tens of thousands of pounds that he's received and now seemingly has forgotten. I think his behaviour has been disgraceful. I'm very pleased the government's dealt with it. He's no longer going to be a peer. I think he's no longer a Labour Party member, and I think his public life in Britain is over. So I think there is no chance of him ever coming back. He might think otherwise, judged by what he said in the Times, but I think his career is over, and I think that that's the right thing. Of course, the general principle is people can learn from their mistakes, but in Peter Mandelson's case, he appears not really to be that sorry from what I can see. I mean, I've read this interview he did with the Times at the weekend, sort of posing for photographs as if it's a kind of magazine profile of a man, rather than somebody who has had to resign in disgrace because he was friends with the world's most notorious paedophile. And, this is ultimately about, in this case, the women and girls that were abused by Jeffrey Epstein. There doesn't seem to be all that much talk about them from some of these characters who I think have a lot to apologise for. So, look, I do sympathise with the idea that people shouldn't come back after disgrace. Certainly in Peter Mandelson's case, he won't do. The general principle is some people, I think, should be able to reform and learn. But Peter Mandelson's clearly not in that case.
Well, he's clearly wanting to, or was when he did that interview, and the whole point of it was to sort of say, well, I haven't disappeared, I'm going to come back. But I think you're probably right, it's difficult now. Lucy Fisher, you've been covering politics for some years. Have you ever seen anything like this?
I haven't, Ian, in a word, and I've heard people compare this to the Profumo scandal. Look, there's a long way for this to go with the police investigation. Confirmation tonight that it is going to be a full-scale criminal investigation into potential misconduct in public office. I think it's enormously serious. And the problem with these types of scandals are they don't just taint the individual, they do damage trust in politics and politicians as a whole. So I can understand the sentiment of the questioner that, what can be done? What can the government do to show it's trying to grip this, and that it will sanction people responsible for this level of sort of outrageous behaviour. And I do think that fine, Peter Mandelson has resigned from the House of Lords today. I understand Downing Street is still looking at possible ways to strip him of his title, which, in our class-obsessed society, is something nobody wants to see Peter Mandelson still walking around with. But I think there will be a wider move to introduce a mechanism so that disgraced members of the House of Lords in particular can be expelled and be stripped of their titles, and then that can be more easily done without needing primary legislation each time, because that hasn't happened for over 100 years. 1917 is the last time someone was stripped of their title.
Sarah Pochin.
Yes, I totally agree with the text question. I'm afraid that if you behave like this in this disgraceful way, then you should absolutely be stripped of your titles and never return to such high office. Look,
can I be controversial and play devil's advocate here and say, look, we do have something called the Rehabilitation of Offenders Act. We do believe that prisoners, I mean, he's not in prison yet, but people can change their ways. John Profumo is a good example of this, somebody who was sacked from the cabinet by Harold Macmillan for all sorts of different reasons, but you can't get much more serious than lying to Parliament. And yet he, over the next 30 years, did great charitable works, I think got an OBE at one point. Now, he never came back into politics. But it is possible to rehabilitate yourself.
We're talking about whether or not you could be or should be ever reappointed to high office. And my point is very clear. People like myself, all of us sat around this table, certainly the politicians sat around the table, have been elected into this position, this privileged position, where we represent, our electorate. And that means that we have to behave way above and beyond even normal standards of behaviour. We are setting an example, and I stand by what I say. If you are in a public position like we are, and you behave like this, then you should never return to it. That doesn't mean to say you can't, in your private life, do good works, do good charity works, and almost, try and make up for it, if you like. But no, you do not come back to these positions. And quite frankly, look, Prince Andrew, who is now Andrew Mount Windsor, he's been stripped of his titles, quite rightly so, in my opinion. He will never be returned, I would hope, to his title of Prince. And Mandelson, you talked about prisoners. I was a magistrate for 20 years. Of course, I believe in rehabilitation of prisoners. Mandelson's not in prison yet, as you say, but it wouldn't surprise me, and I would feel very uncomfortable if I was Peter Mandelson, because I think he could well be looking at a prison sentence.
There are stories today about your party treasurer, Nick Candy's relationship with Ghislaine Maxwell, admittedly before she was convicted. Is that concerning you at all?
I honestly haven't seen those stories. I've been hard at work on 2 child benefit cap debates in the chamber, so I genuinely haven't seen those stories, and I wouldn't comment on that anyway.
OK, Josh Babarendi.
Well, I think it's appalling what it is clear that Peter Mandelson has done. But if I park the political outcry over that for a moment, I want to bring it back to those who I think are most important in this entire scandal, and that is the many victims and survivors of Jeffrey Epstein's or disgusting, awful crimes. These are folks who have suffered so much abuse. These are people who will be extremely re-traumatized by all of this stuff coming out, and there will be some of those victims and survivors who are in this country now, and they need to know, and I want them to know, that politicians across the political divide stand with them as survivors, and we have to do everything possible to support those folks to recover from what they've been through. In terms of Peter Mandelson, look, this is a guy who shared market-sensitive information with people outside the country who stood to benefit. This is a guy who advised an external actor to bully the government that he was a part of, our government. This is a gross violation of this country, a gross violation of democracy. The criminal investigation has just got to be the start. I think that we need a full-scale public inquiry into what has happened.
Well, shouldn't that, you're jumping the gun a bit, aren't you, there? Surely that would, once the police investigation has been concluded and they decide whether to level charges or not, and if they do, it goes through the courts, surely that's the time when you have the public inquiry.
I think you do the criminal investigation first, absolutely. But I don't think, for all the awfulness of this situation, that this starts and finishes with Peter Mandelson. I think this is indicative of a culture in some corners of our democracy where there are some people who think that they're above the law, there are some people who think that they can hide from the law, and we need to root out that toxic element of our democracy.
How would a public inquiry do that?
A public inquiry looks at why this has happened, where this has gone on, what some of the gaps are in the legislation, in the regulation, and the rest. You look at the House of Lords, it is a completely unaccountable body. I believe, Liberal Democrats believe, that it should be completely abolished, and we let the public hold the people who sit in that chamber to account. There's lots further that we need to go, and a public inquiry will help us establish exactly what we need to do to stop this.
If it's such a bad institution, of course, you could withdraw all your Liberal Democrat peers from it and join Reform, because they have no peers.
Change it from within. We've got to vote.
Okay.
That's what we'll do.
Right, let's bring a follow-up caller in. It's Chris in Richmond. Hello, Chris.
Hello, Ian. Hello, panel. Is the end of Mandelson going to bring on the end of Starmer?
Right. Lucy Fisher.
Sorry, I didn't catch the question.
Will the end of Mandelson bring about the end of Starmer?
Well, I certainly think that scrutiny is turning to Starmer's judgment in appointing him, and also the influence perhaps of some of his key advisors. I think Morgan McSweeney, his chief of staff, known to be a kind of key ally of Mandelson, and some suggestions, he was really sort of pushing this appointment from within when there were links between Mandelson and Epstein already known. And I think the difficulty here is that there's already a bit of a narrative that around Starmer that as someone who's not particularly ideological, who doesn't have really his own politics, that he is being driven by advisors. Other people are in charge of the show. So I feel that narrative could really be fueled by this scandal and people looking at how this appointment came about. And also a lot of question marks over the vetting process, the sort of ins and outs of the procedure, and whether they were followed to a T or whether issues were inappropriately passed over.
Josh?
Well, I think that this calls Keir Starmer's judgment into question. Keir Starmer is the one who ultimately appointed Peter Mandelson to be our ambassador in the United States, one of the most prestigious and most important diplomatic positions that exists across our government. And we've heard that the vetting process wasn't sufficient. We've heard that we know, in fact, that he didn't appear before various select committees who were urging him to appear there for pre-appointment scrutiny. And so Keir Starmer's judgment is absolutely for scrutiny here. But again, this calls into question the process that sits around these appointments. This appointment was able to slip through the net and has brought our country into disrepute and could have brought it into even further disrepute.
With hindsight, it has. But at the time, what was not to like? Somebody with an international profile, expert on trade, had been EU Trade Commissioner, We wanted a trade deal with the United States. I mean, there were many reasons for Keir Starmer to do this. So I think we all look at this now with hindsight and say, well, OK, well, if we'd known what we know now then, obviously it wouldn't have happened.
The Labour chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee at the time was complaining, and rightly so, that her committee didn't have the chance to interview and to scrutinise Peter Mandelson before he was appointed. It's not a matter of hindsight. It ought to have been a matter of process. And this is a man who's had to resign, I think, 3 times from various scandals over the years.
And 3 times, and he's now out.
Indeed.
Sarah?
Well, I think it shows very, very weak judgment of people's characters yet again by Keir Starmer in this appointment. My understanding is that he was advised by the security services not to appoint Peter Mandelson. Now, I read that. I can't remember where I read it and heard it on the radio, so I can't tell you why I've got that piece of information in my head. But I definitely have heard that he was advised against this appointment and ignored that advice. Now, you might know more about that than I do, Ian. But the point is, he's shown weak judgment all around, whether it's to do with the Minister Tulip Sadiq, whether it's to do with, Angela Rayner and the housing thing, whatever's happened.
He was quite brutal with both of them.
Yes.
He got rid of them.
Yes, but it still shows weak judgment.
How does it show weak judgment if he got rid of them very quickly?
Well, because he appointed them in the beginning. Here we are. Here we are that we have another appointment here of somebody who clearly it seems to have had a quite a murky career, let's put it that way, and has managed to survive all sorts of things going on over the years. But clearly this time he's not survived. He's been rumbled. We can all see him for what he really is, and I think he'll pay a very high price for his actions.
Gordon McKee, so the question is, will the end for Mandelson bring about the end for Starmer as well?
No, and I think what you're saying there, Ian, before is right. I mean, it's very easy in hindsight, but the truth is Peter Mandelson went into number 10 and he lied to the Prime Minister. He lied to his team. He lied to the vetting team. He misled not just number 10, but a whole generation of people. I mean, some of the potential crimes that we're talking about happened in 2009. I mean, I was literally in school when that happened, and nobody knew about it for 16 years. This is a guy who, as I say, has disgraced himself. And of course, if Keir had even an inkling of what was in these emails and the nature and depth of his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, he would never have been appointed. But he didn't know that. And Peter Mandelson lied to him. And as soon as it was found out that he'd lied to him, he was literally woken out of his bed in the ambassador's residence and sacked.
You say, and again, this is devil's advocate here, but you say he lied to the Prime Minister. Peter Mandelson is effectively, from what I can gather, is saying, well, I don't remember any of this. I mean, he says that the bank statements from JP Morgan that show the money being transferred, he doesn't recognise them.
Right, sure. I mean, of course he's saying that. I mean, I find that very hard to believe that you would receive £50,000 and forget about it, personally. He may say he's forgot about it, so he's not lied. Sure, I don't quite buy that, but that maybe is what he's saying. What is definitely true is he wasn't forthright with the full truth with Downing Street, whether by forgetting or being deliberate about it. I suspect it was probably the latter.
Gordon, I think you're being naive at best, but also I think it's your job clearly to protect your party leader and say what you're saying. But let's face it, Mandelson has been an integral part of the Labour Party for decades. There is no way that somebody like Keir Starmer, that has risen to the level he's risen, did not know about some of the things that Mandelson got up to in his past. I just do not buy that, and I don't think the British public buy it.
How would you know about all of the Epstein stuff?
I'm not necessarily saying Epstein, I'm saying, but, we're talking here about Mandelson leaking information.
But no one knew about that.
To Gordon Brown.
Gordon Brown didn't know about it until Sunday.
I think it's a rather generous thing to say that Keir Starmer genuinely didn't know about any of this.
I don't think he clearly didn't know about it, because it's now a police matter that
people are going to have questions to answer.
What I would say, Sarah, is the difference between my party and your party is when we find someone's done wrongdoing, we sack them and we get rid of them.
And where have we not done that?
Well, your leader in Wales, who literally was convicted for corruption and working with a Russian agent. That, I think, is a very, very serious thing.
Gone. He's out the window.
And what about the endorsement? We may come on to the Gorton and Denton by-election, but I wonder what your view is.
Funnily enough.
Is that the next question?
Well, it's associated with the next question. So let's finish that there and move on, but we have to go to a break first. It's 19 minutes past 8.
This is LBC.
At
Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
8 on LBC. You nearly got a little bit of gossip there between me and Sarah, but luckily I realised the microphone was about to come back on. Sarah Pochin is here, Reform UK MP, Gordon McKee, Labour MP, Josh Babarindi, Liberal Democrat MP and the party's president. How are you finding being Mr. President? And have you got any similarities with Donald Trump?
I'm not sure. I told him to go and stick it where the sun don't shine the other day, or much worse, something that I can't say on air. So I don't think that there's any hope of commonality between us.
Right, and Lucy Fisher is here, Whitehall editor of the Financial Times. Right, a text question from Nathaniel in Dover. Is the next election seriously going to be between the Greens and Reform? Well, Josh, you're obviously going to say no.
No, it's not. In fact, in very many places across the country, it is between the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats. When you look at the results from local elections since May, in fact, last year, it was the Liberal Democrats that won more council by-elections than anybody else. In fact, more than Labour and the Conservatives combined. When you look at the local election results overall, we've won more seats than Labour and the Liberal Democrats, again, for the first time over the last couple of years. And so we are very much taking on the Conservatives still, as we were at the last general election. But it looks like the two main parties are definitely down and quite possibly out.
Sarah?
Very unusual, isn't it? I mean, I think my election was the last by-election I think we've had, and that was a two-party race between Reform and Labour in Runcorn and Helsby.
Which is odd, because it had been a Lib Dem seat not that long ago.
But it was very clearly Runcorn and Helsby.
Oh, no, Rochdale.
Yeah,
sorry,
no, it's always been Labour.
Yes,
yeah, you are. Yes, yeah. Well, that's all right for you to do, not for me to do. But no, very much a traditional Labour seat, and that was a two-horse race. But I think what we are seeing is a complete decimation of the Tories. That nobody even mentions the Tories. They didn't in Runcorn and Helsby, and I've been campaigning in Gorton and Denton, and they're certainly not mentioning them up there either. Labour, if I might say so, have completely played this wrong with the whole Andy Burnham thing, and so they've been in such a mess over all of that. I think a lot of their voters are very disenfranchised, as they were in Runcorn, Runcorn and Helsby, but for different reasons. And so, interestingly, yes, I think potentially it could be a two-horse race between the Greens and Reform, particularly with other parties like the Jeremy Corbyn party and I don't know what they're calling themselves these days, and the Galloway set up, not standing in order to support the Greens. So with the pro-Gaza, pro-Palestine stance, and clearly this constituency does have, I think, about a 30% Muslim population. So that's quite a different dynamic to Runcorn and Helsby. But yes, getting back to the question, I think it probably is a two-horse race.
So in that case, why won't Nigel Farage debate Zach Polanski?
Well, Zia Youssef has offered to debate.
He's not the leader, though. Zach Polanski is the leader of the Green Party, so therefore surely Nigel Farage should agree to that.
I don't know if Nigel's been asked, has he?
Oh, no.
Okay.
Well,
I know that Zia
put it
offered and Zach said no.
Zach said he would debate Nigel.
Oh, did he? I haven't heard that last twist.
All these little games. Gordon?
No, it's not. It's a race between Labour and Reform. And you mentioned the Gorton and Denton by-election. I'm told that I'm not allowed to name the by-election candidates by name, so I won't do that. But what I will say is this is a Labour-held seat. The Reform candidate in this by-election has been endorsed by Tommy Robinson, who is one of the most prominent racists, frankly, in this country. And I do not understand why Reform haven't disavowed that endorsement. I do not understand.
People are entitled to endorse who they want to endorse.
Sarah, you might not want to hear it, but it's really important. Because the last time that Reform won a by-election in this country, Sarah was elected.
It was me.
That's right. And you have used your platform to go on TV and say that you don't want to see black or Asian people on television.
Oh, for goodness sake.
And that is the consequence of Reform getting a seat in Parliament.
That was a clip that was taken out of context.
People in Gorton and Denton,
there is not a racist bone in my body, and that's a low blow.
And if you want to stop someone like Matthew Goodwin getting into Parliament...
Why do you want to stop Matthew Goodwin? He's standing up for British people. We prioritise British people.
So you're not going to disavow the endorsement by Tommy Robinson?
People can endorse who they want to endorse.
He's literally a white supremacist.
We cannot stop anybody endorsing us.
The leading racist in this country.
We cannot stop anybody endorsing us.
You're okay with that? But you can say right here on this show that you don't want his endorsement. Are you going to say that?
Look...
You're not going to say that. Isn't that shameful?
The point is, it's not shameful. You're shameful in accusing me of being a racist when you know there's not a racist bone in my body. But
I know what you said on television, and I know that your candidate is endorsed by Tommy Robinson.
Look, we do not choose who endorses us.
Sarah, Nigel Farage has said he doesn't want anything to do with Tommy Robinson.
Absolutely.
So you would say that?
Of course.
So why can't you say you don't want his endorsement?
Well, I listen. He's done it. We can't take it back. Everybody is free to endorse.
But you can say you don't want it. You can say he's an abhorrent individual who's spreading abhorrent views.
I would agree with Nigel that there is no place for Tommy Robinson in reform as a member of Parliament or in any other way. But we cannot stop somebody if he wants to endorse us. He's going to endorse us.
Do you share some of Tommy Robinson's views?
I do not.
So why can't you say that you don't want his endorsement?
Well, I think I just have. I've just made the point that Nigel has said quite clearly that he's not part of our party. But what you're doing by directing this conversation towards Tommy Robinson is completely missing the point. In Matt Goodwin, the people of Gorton and Denton...
That's twice you've done... Sarah, you've done it twice now. I'm not going to have to read out all of the candidates.
Yeah, I thought you did it.
No, he didn't name it.
He did.
He did.
One to you.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, well, at the end of this section, I'm going to read out all the candidates. But before we get there, can you just clear up this thing about what you said? You said it was taken out of context. How was it? I mean, effectively, you said you thought there were too many people, non-white people, in adverts on television.
What I was doing was actually what I should have said was quote the evidence base, which I've got so much better at after that mistake that I made by not quoting an evidence base. And it was a Channel 4 survey that had come out only 2 weeks before the interview that I was giving on a competitor show to yours. And what I should have said was that evidence showed that there were, I think it's over 50% of actors in adverts show or portray sort of mixed ethnicity families and that type of thing, and yet only 4% of the population, and so therefore that British people, or I would say, at the end of the day, were not feeling that adverts were representing necessarily the actual makeup. And I was just making that point, and it was taken completely out of context. But let's move on. We're talking about Gorton and Denton, and we've both.
Well, we're talking about the general election, actually. That's what the question was all about.
What was the question?
The question was, is the next election seriously going to be between the Greens and Reform?
Oh, I thought we were talking about the by-election. No. The by-election is definitely between the Greens.
It's definitely not. It's definitely not. It's a Labour Health constituency. And
what I would say about the general election,
make sure they get a Labour MP.
What I would say about the next general election is the Tories are an absolute busted flush finished. And if Labour
closing the gap with Reform?
If Labour carries on the way they are, then they are also not going to be re-elected. They're losing their core vote left, right, and centre.
The figures show that the Conservatives, albeit very slowly, are closing the gap with Reform. In the polls.
Do you know what? You can look at these polls, it would drive you mad because all these polls say different things day after day. So, I don't take much notice. We're a long way out from a general election.
It's the only thing we have to go on. Right, Lucy Fisher, as an independent arbiter of all of this, what do you think of the question?
Well, look, I think we have entered a period of five-party politics, but the idea it's going to be between the Greens and Reform at the general election, I think, doesn't hold water. I think really it's going to be, unless there's major movement in the polls, very much a narrative that this is Labour versus Reform, or in particular, Keir Starmer versus Nigel Farage. And in fact, I think Labour is going to use that narrative to try and shore up the vote among the sort of broader progressive left, and many people who might otherwise in locals or by-elections vote Green, I think will want to come back to Labour or vote for Starmer tactically to avoid Nigel Farage coming in. I think it is interesting, and you're right to point out that it's narrowing in the polls between the Conservatives and Reform. And I think we need to see maybe a year out what the numbers look like. I spoke to someone in the Tory shadow cabinet last week who said, look, if one of the right-wing parties is in the teens and the other's in the 30s, there'll be no agreement. But if both are in the 20s, surely we've got to come together and unite the right. Otherwise, it's allowing Labour to come through the middle.
Well, there's certainly a lot of narrowing between the Tories and Reform. It seems to be Reform is just full of former Tories. I mean, you've literally got the Tory immigration minister, who's now your shadow chancellor. Every week there's a new Tory MP.
Well, I think you should watch this Space, Gordon. Announced, has it?
I think he is he?
I think so.
The shadow chancellor, Robert
there haven't been any shadow appointments made yet, have
absolutely
there? Which
not.
job would you like? Because whatever one it is, it's going to go to the next Tory, isn't it?
Well, listen, I'd obviously be delighted with any job the boss decided to give me. But what I was going to say was, I'd hold that thought, because Nigel at the press conference today has said that I think there's three.
So he keeps saying, I'll believe it when I see it.
I don't know whether I have no idea,
well,
but apparently
it's definitely not me. I don't think there's anybody.
But shouldn't you be more worried about the challenge that the Green Party because providing for Labour? Because the Greens in some polls, not all of them, but in some, are outvoting Labour.
I'm certainly worried, and if you look actually at Sarah's by-election, had a bit fewer people voted Green and more voted Labour, then we would have won that by-election, and the people of that constituency wouldn't have a Reform MP. And it's the same in this upcoming by-election. It is ultimately a battle between Labour and Reform. Whatever people think, and I totally understand, not everybody is totally content with the pace of change so far. I totally get that frustration. But this election, by-election, but this general election that is still a few years away, will be probably the most important election ever, because the threat of Reform getting into Parliament in large numbers would be a disaster for this country.
But if
We've just heard about Tommy Robinson endorsing their candidate.
Gordon.
Well, I'm arguing that he shouldn't be.
Yeah, and if we're voted into power, it's because the people
in this country who don't share your vision of Britain, who believe in a progressive, multicultural Britain, the thing that they should do in by-elections, in local elections, and in the general election when it comes, is vote Labour.
Well, that's not how they're voting.
I'm going to read out the candidates. Pin your ears back. Nick Buckley, Advance UK. Charlotte Cadden, Conservative. Dan Clark, Libertarian. Matt Goodwin, Reform UK. Sebastian Moore, Social Democratic Party. Joseph O. Meacher, Rejoin EU Party. Jackie Piercy, Liberal Democrat. Hannah Spencer, Green Party. Angeliki Stoja, Labour Party. Sir Oinkalot, Monster Raving Loony Party, and Hugo Wills, Communist League. So I've done my duty.
Sorry.
I'll forgive you.
Thousands now.
Right, we'll move on in a moment. It's 8:33, news headlines on LBC with Darryl Jackson.
Lord Mandelson will face a full criminal investigation into allegations that he leaked market-sensitive information from Downing Street to Jeffrey Epstein. The former US ambassador who's denied wrongdoing is stepping down from the House of Lords. A 15-year-old will appear in court tomorrow charged with murdering another teenager in Wiltshire. Shane Ham-Bakachare died in hospital after being attacked in Chippenham on Saturday. And there'll be a formal investigation into Elon Musk's X and its chatbot Grok for its creation of sexualised deepfake images. X says it has made changes to prevent this happening. LBC weather, rain moving northwards, turning to snow on higher ground in Wales, the Pennines and eastern Scotland. Clearer further south with some showers, a low of -1.
Call the Cabinet on LBC. Put your questions to the Health Secretary, Wes Streeting. Tomorrow from 1 p.m. with Sheila Fogarty.
Chase is the
Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
Well, it's a lively cross question today, I think you'll agree. That's because we have Sarah Pochin on the panel, Reform UK MP for Runcorn and Helsby. Josh Babarind is being perfectly behaved, Liberal Democrat MP for Eastbourne, who's the party's president. Gordon McKee, well, he's fighting his corner, shall we say. Labour MP for Glasgow South, and Lucy Fisher, the voice of common sense, Whitehall editor of the Financial Times. Right, a WhatsApp question from Jim in Lincoln. With DEFRA, the latest body championing the idea that Britain is racist due to the lack of minorities in rural areas, why do we consistently allow our culture to be chipped away piece by piece instead of standing up and being proud of British life? People should assimilate to our way of life, and the government should not fundamentally change the country against our will under the guise of multiculturalism. Now, just a bit of background to this. The Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs has launched a diversity drive to make some of Britain's best-known beauty spots, such as the Cotswolds and the Chilterns. This comes after a 2019 report commissioned by the department saw the authors say that the countryside is seen by both black, Asian and minority ethnic groups and white people as very much a white environment, and that there's a risk that our country will end up being irrelevant to the country that actually exists. Josh?
I haven't seen this document, but do I think that it's right that everywhere in this country is as inclusive as it could be, or should it be as super inclusive to people from all different backgrounds, all different ethnicities, all different citizens in our country? Absolutely yes. And so I don't think there's anything wrong with the government saying, how can we achieve that? How can we achieve that inclusivity? I was really interested in the last conversation to hear Sarah speak about almost diversity targets for TV adverts, and especially interested as someone of colour who is currently on the TV in some ways, shapes and forms. And I expect that what Sarah might say on this question is that this is absolutely rubbish. We shouldn't.
Well, should we let her say what she wants to say?
Well, I would love to hear, and I'd love to respond. But I think that we are a multicultural society. That is the basis of Britain. I'm proud that Britain essentially adopted my family that moved here. My family's gone on to make contributions in all different sorts of ways. My family is just as entitled to be here as anyone who is white British or any other ethnicity. And my family is just as entitled to access the countryside and rural areas as much as anyone else. That, I think, is essentially what the government is saying here. And I want to see what the government is going to practice to the words that it's preached.
And you represent a seat which I don't imagine the non-white population is massive in Eastbourne. I may be wrong, but I mean, and you come from Eastbourne, don't you?
Born and bred.
Yeah, but have you ever felt, because you are not white, that you've been out of place there at all, or not? You didn't feel the same sort of part of the community as other people?
At times across my life, I mean, I've experienced racial abuse and all sorts in all different kinds of pockets, and I've definitely felt out of place. I've had people say, go home, deport him and stuff, which is pretty difficult because there's no direct flights to Eastbourne District General Hospital. But I think, a serious point, again, coming to some of the comments around black and Asian people in TV adverts, that is really damaging when folks like Sarah say these things, is that it emboldens people to live and breathe that racism. And Sarah, you're saying that what your words didn't come from a racist place, and I'm just going to have to take your word for it. But it does make people out there think, oh, hang on a minute, it is okay to judge people on the basis of the colour of their skin rather than the content of their character.
Yet again, you're being utterly unfair. My point was simply...
What's unfair are the racist messages that I received after you made your comments. People who thought it was okay to bash me because of the colour of my skin. So I won't take lectures from you on what is fair and unfair when it comes to racism.
I'm not lecturing you, Josh. I'm just saying I'm not racist, and those comments were taken out of context. But can we get back to the question, which was about the countryside? Now, I actually live in a very rural area, and I have to say I don't understand what this story is about. Everybody is welcome. I've got 2 dogs. When I walk them in the woods on a Sunday morning, I see people of all ethnicities walking in the woods. I really don't understand. This is just a non-issue. Everybody is welcome. And why would you ever think that you weren't welcome?
Because we hear comments from people like you saying we're not welcome in different spaces.
You've utterly made that up. I challenge you.
In different spaces.
When have I ever
You're
said
saying
that?
black and Asian people are essentially...
You are absolutely talking nonsense.
You're saying black and
what you're saying is divisive. And you are now being racist. And it's not
You've
true.
said that black and Asian people... You've insinuated that black and Asian people are essentially not welcome in a particular space in our country.
I never said that. What are you talking about?
You were saying that it drives you mad that there are too many on TV.
I was talking about the representation. You know exactly what I was talking about. The representation on adverts compared to the actual demographics of our population. We are talking about the countryside.
Okay. Well, let's get back to that.
Everybody's welcome in the countryside. And you know that's right because you won't answer this question. What evidence have you got to say that not everybody is welcome in the countryside? There's no evidence.
But it is true, Sarah.
There is no evidence.
If you look at particularly rural areas, I mean, there are. I think I'm right in saying it's about 13% of the population are now non-white. If you go to little villages in the middle of Norfolk or wherever, or Devon or Cornwall, you wouldn't even find 1%. So, I mean, I think that's what the report was all about.
But would you? Is that? It's not because they're not, people don't welcome or want to see people from different ethnic backgrounds. Maybe it's that they don't want to move there because there's no one stopping them renting or moving there or buying a house. So why don't they?
Gordon.
I think, I agree with Josh. I think one of the things that makes this country great, and there's a lot of things, is its diversity and people of different ethnicities, of different religious backgrounds, living side by side, building strong communities. And that's what makes it great. And as an MP, you get to see that, whether it's the nurses working in an NHS hospital or the Royal Marines that I've spoke to as part of the Armed Forces Parliamentary Scheme I'm on. And I think it is pretty reasonable for the government to try and make everywhere in this country inclusive. I think that's a good thing. And I have no issue with it at all. I think what Josh said is absolutely right. And Sarah, you may not think it, but when you go on TV and say those things, people react to it, and it emboldens the worst people in this country. And I just want to come back to that point.
What evidence have you got that people are not welcome in the countryside?
The evidence is what Josh just told you about the reaction to your
What evidence have you got that people are not welcome in the countryside, which is what this question is about, which is what we are supposed to be discussing?
Okay, well, let's get it back on track. Lucy.
Look, I agree with Josh and Gordon that, anything that boosts inclusivity is a good idea. I also think, I'd like to see the government and the discourse be a bit more assertive in this country about what a success story of multiculturalism it is. And it worries me to see the UK misrepresented, particularly in the United States or pockets around the MAGA movement, suggesting that we suffer from a terrible degree of sectarianism in our cities and elsewhere. And I'd like to see, senior politicians stand up and challenge that more.
That's the kind of thing which, by the way, is purported and encouraged by Tommy Robinson and others. And that's why it's so important that people are aware that he has endorsed the Reform candidate.
Can we just get back to this question?
Okay.
All you're doing is using this as a political
platform. But I mean, interestingly, whenever we talk about these issues on LBC, where I take calls from people, I'm always encouraged by the number of people from Black and Asian communities who ring in and say what a great country this is, because I'm not sure that would happen in every other European country, if I'm honest. So perhaps we should be a little bit more proud of that. It's 8:45.
You're right.
On the latest episode of The Newsagents.
The Mandelson files are handed from the Cabinet Office to the Metropolitan Police. Is this shaping up to be potentially the worst corruption scandal in British politics for the last half-century?
Get the latest episode of The Newsagents with Emily Maitlis, John Sopel and Lewis Goodall. Listen or watch on our free Global Player app or the LBC app.
Idle
Question with Iain Dale. Watch live on both Global Player and the new LBC app.
It's 8:48 on LBC. I've just told everybody what the fun question is, which I think you'll enjoy when we get to it at the end. Right, we have Sarah Pochin MP, Gordon McKee MP, Josh Baberinda MP and Lucy Fisher with us. Does that make you feel inadequate that you haven't got MP after your name?
No, I'm pretty content not to have those particular.
I think it makes it more popular.
Right, a text question from Jennifer in Leeds. Given we have such low birth rates in this country, why does anyone want to restrict child benefits to stop people having more kids? Now, MPs have voted this evening to scrap the 2-child benefit cap following a U-turn by the government, but the Conservatives are continuing to support the cap, which was introduced while they were in power in 2013, while Reform UK had previously supported abolishing it, but have now themselves U-turned and say they would reimpose a 2-child cap as well. The Lib Dems have been campaigning against the cap since 2017. Is that clear? Gordon, let's start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, and I think the 2-child cap was a heinous policy introduced by the Tories to divide people, and ultimately it was kids that paid the price for it. And I'm very, very pleased this evening that I was able to vote to remove it. And that's 500,000 kids now lifted out of poverty, or will be lifted out of poverty as a result of that. The Tories oppose it. Nigel Farage last year said he wanted to scrap it. Now we've scrapped it. He said he wants to bring it back to pay for a cut in beer duty. It seems deeply bizarre to me. I was actually looking earlier. Apparently, if you're a family impacted by this, you'd have to drink 350 pints a week to be financially better off. That may be what
that's
Nigel
everyone
drinks.
in Glasgow, then, isn't
that may be what Nigel Farage drinks. But there's a sort of serious point here, which is these are kids in real desperate poverty, a lot of them. The majority of families impacted by this are in work, so you shouldn't believe what you hear from others, that from Reform and others. This is a very good thing that we've done. I'm very pleased we were able to do it. We always said as soon as we were able to afford to do it, we would do it. It's a very good thing. 500,000 kids are lifted out of poverty, and it's good, obviously, that those kids aren't in poverty, but also these people are the future of our country. They're the builders, the doctors, the surgeons of the future, and we're no longer going to be growing up in poverty. They're going to have the opportunity to reach their full
So why wasn't
potential.
it done? Was one of the first acts of a Labour government?
Well, as I say, but what we always said was when we had the money able to do it, we would do it, and that's what we've done. And it's, as I say, it's 500,000 kids lifted out of poverty. It's a very good thing.
Lucy.
I think it's a pertinent question from you, Iain, why it wasn't done right at the beginning, almost day one, priority for Keir Starmer. What is a Labour government for if it's not to draw, as
Indeed,
you say,
which
Gordon?
Is why we've done it.
Well, finally, but I think tactically this has been handled all wrong, not least because, there's another stack of welfare cuts coming down the line. And if the government weren't going to bring this forward immediately to signal their priorities, to give this as a boon to people who don't want to see benefits cuts without being part of a broader package to try and bring down that enormous bill, I just find the sort of handling of it very bizarre.
Lucy, you know that the country was left in an absolute mess by the last lot, the Tory government and Tory MPs, who, by the way, are all now part of Reform. And so there was a lot of things that we had to fix that we are fixing. We are only 18 months into a 5-year term, and I am delighted that this evening myself and my Labour colleagues were able to vote to scrap the hated 2-child cap and left 500,000 kids out of poverty.
The hated 2-child cap that was supported by a majority of people in the opinion polls?
Well, actually, if you look at the people that this is, if you ask people whether they want to lift kids out of poverty, the vast majority of people, as you would imagine, say yes.
Yeah, but your definition of poverty is maybe not theirs, because you're talking about relative poverty rather than absolute poverty.
I'm talking about kids who are growing up unable to achieve their full potential because of a policy brought in by George Osborne to divide politicians. I think it was wrong, and I'm glad we've got rid of it.
Well, he would say that it was brought in because of there wasn't the money for it.
Well, no, I think he did it quite cynically and quite deliberately, and I'm afraid, unfortunately, it was successful politically, but instead of politicians paying the price, it was kids.
OK. Josh?
Well, I mean, this has been a long time coming. Liberal Democrats have campaigned to get rid of this cap since 2017, as you said. I think the first ever vote, actually, that I cast on getting elected as an MP in 2024 was to scrap the cap. And it was thwarted, I'm afraid.
Did you vote for that, Gordon?
No, this is part of an amendment to the King's Speech. Well, because we just got into government and it wasn't in our manifesto, so you wouldn't expect the first thing that we did after elected was something that wasn't in our manifesto. That was
if it lifted 500,000 kids out of poverty, to use your argument, I would.
No, but there's a whole series of things in that King's speech that had very positive effects, like the Employment Rights Bill, now the Employment Rights Act, which is going to put more money in people's pockets, give them more rights at work. There's a whole platform of things in there to try and fix the country. I mean, I find it extraordinary tonight. We're sort of debating as if we haven't just done it. Literally tonight, I've just come from the House of Commons where I've voted to lift this thing.
I interrupted.
Yeah, well, I'm proud to have just voted to lift that cap, but it shouldn't have taken that long. And if I really,
but let me interrupt again, because your party was part of the coalition that introduced the cap in the first place.
Our party did not introduce that cap.
You were the government that introduced it.
The two-child benefit cap is something that we've campaigned to lift since 2017.
Yeah, but not. You were in the coalition government. There was a minister in the Department of Work and Pensions at that time from the Liberal Democrats that introduced it. So you can't be too holier than thou.
Well, I was literally a child during that coalition government. And
That's two of you that have used the child excuse now.
I know that Liberal Democrats fought the Conservatives every single day in that coalition government, based on what my colleagues who were there tell me. But what I do see, what I have seen in my own constituency in Eastbourne, we have had the busiest food bank in the country. More food parcels distributed at Eastbourne's food bank than any other Trussell food bank. That's tens of thousands of food parcels that children have claimed. I made the case to scrap this cap. So have Liberal Democrats for years and years and years. And it wasn't enough. I don't know why, in the first instance, for Labour to change its mind. When a Labour government, in the first instance, a Labour government, you would expect to be a government that prioritises getting rid of child poverty. And it was absolutely disgraceful that they didn't listen in the first instance. I'm glad they've been dragged kicking and screaming now, but it shouldn't have taken
extraordinary.
so long.
I mean, we literally tonight lifted the cap. We voted only because 400 Labour MPs, with the greatest respect to Josh and his colleagues, there's not enough of them in the House of Commons to get anything over the line. It's only because the Labour government tonight has lifted this cap that 500,000 kids are going to be.
You have made that point 3 times. Let's hear from Sarah.
Backbench Labour MPs dragged you kicking and screaming.
Let's hear from Sarah.
The point that Reform are making on this, I voted against it, as did my Reform colleagues. And the point is that we want to support hard-working British families, British parents that are both out at work. So we will lift this cap for working families, for British citizens. That is very clear, because we believe in an alarm clock Britain, and if we carry on boosting our welfare state in the way we are, then we are simply creating a country where it is not worth working. You get more for being on benefits. We all know this, sat around the table. So why, as the Labour government and with support from the Liberal Democrats, boosting again the welfare state instead of creating a country where it pays to work? Because without people working, we will not get growth.
Sarah, can I ask a question just on your policy, right? So you're saying if Reform was in government, you'd have to have both parents in work in order to receive this support. What would happen if one of those parents tragically died?
I am saying that as a policy, yes, both those parents...
What you're saying is, in that situation, if a family had the tragic instance of a parent dying, the Reform government would take money off them.
What I'm saying is that the principle of our policy is that parents need to be at work.
But you said both parents there. So you see, if one of the parents tragically dies or something terrible happens, the action of a Nigel Farage-led government would literally be taking money out of the pockets of a bereaved parent and putting a kid into poverty.
What I am making very clear is that Reform put alarm clock Britain first. We support those working parents that are going out every morning trying to do the best for their families. Okay, that is who we will support with this policy.
What about you? You were very clear there when you said for British citizens. Mm-hmm. Now, I understand the logic of that, but there'll be people who come to this country who pay into the system, maybe have done so for 10 or 15 years, that they're not British citizens, and then one of them is made redundant and they fall on hard times through no fault of their own. Are you seriously saying that those people would be penalised because they don't happen to be actual British citizens?
But why would you be in this country for 15 years and not have applied for British citizenship?
Well, there are many reasons that you might not have done.
But what we're saying is that as Reform always make very clear, we want to prioritise British citizens. And that is our stance, and we make it very clear. And I cannot see what the problem is with that. We are not either a food
I think
bank
Gordon's
for
illustrated one
for the
problem.
world,
I've
or we're not a
illustrated another.
benefit system for anybody here. We have to put our own people first, because there is not enough money in the bank to open this up to everybody. We have to prioritise.
So why was Reform in favour of abolishing the two-child cap only a year ago?
Reform is in favour of only abolishing it for working parents. I've made that very clear. That's the policy.
But a year ago, Nigel Farage was advocating effectively what the Labour Party policy is now.
Well, I can only speak for since I've been here, and I know that this policy, I understand it, and that is that we will only do it for working people that are at work, British citizens that are at work.
Iain, I've got to correct the record. You said, and I was pretty sure of this at the time, but I've just double-checked, you said that the Liberal Democrats introduced the two-child benefit.
No, I didn't. I said the coalition government did.
That's not true. So
it's 2013.
No, the two-child benefit cap was announced in the 2015 budget that the Conservatives did after the general election, and it was introduced in 2017. That was a two-child benefit.
Well, if you've checked that, I will bow to your superior knowledge on that, and I take all my vicious accusations back. Happy?
Good.
Right, that's two things I've got wrong in the programme tonight. I think 3 strikes and I'm out. Luckily, the next hour's on prostitution. What could possibly go wrong? Right, our fun question comes from Sammy in Oxford. A new trailer for a biopic of Michael Jackson has been released in which his own nephew is seen playing him. But who would you want to play you in a film about your life? Lucy Fisher.
I'd go for Chloe Sevigny, quite a cool art house choice. So I think her kind of brand of cool would maybe rub off on me reputation-wise. Okay, fair.
Gordon.
I've struggled with this. Jesse Eisenberg, I like his films. He's a bit of a geek, and I guess I am.
Who's he?
He's in, what's he been in? Zombieland. He was in The Social Network. Not that I have many similarities with Mark Zuckerberg, I should say. But yeah, I'd probably go with that one.
Okay. Sarah.
I'd go for Gillian Anderson, because apparently people have said we look quite similar.
Oh, I can see
and
that.
I think she's like a sexy older woman, isn't she? So
and she played Margaret Thatcher. What's not to like?
Oh, well, there you go. In fact, I've forgotten that, genuinely. So there you go. Perfect.
Josh.
When I was a kid, there weren't loads of mixed race people kind of in films and all that kind of stuff. And so when I went to fancy dress parties, I would go again and again and again as Will Smith. And so maybe he ought to play me, given that I've played him so many times as a kid.
And why not? Thank you all very much indeed. Now, I haven't got the list of who's on the programme, or have I? Yes, I have. On the programme tomorrow, we have the human rights barrister, Dr. Charlotte Proudman, the political commentator and former Tory advisor, Lauren McEvatt, plus MPs Mike Reeder from Labour and Sir Ashley Fox from the Conservatives. I can tell you an interesting fact about Mike Reeder, which you won't know, Gordon.
Yeah.
He used to listen to the For the Many podcast with me and Jackie Smith while swimming underwater up the River Dart.
Wow. I can't say that I've done the same, but good. I'm glad.
He will go far, this man. So tune in tomorrow for that panel. Now, in the next hour, we are going to talk about the possibility of legalising prostitution, because the Scottish Parliament has rejected proposed legislation that would have criminalised the act of paying for sex. Soliciting in public, curb crawling and brothel keeping are illegal in Scotland, but paying for sex and arranging for it online are legal. So my question is this. Prostitution has existed since time immemorial. Whatever legislation is passed by any government, it will always exist. So isn't the proper thing to do is to recognise that and regulate it, which is what happens in many other countries, but not here. Would you like to see prostitution legalised here? 0345 6060 973.
On your radio, on the LBC app, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 9 o'clock, the Conservative leader says the Peter Mandelson investigation's a national embarrassment and the Prime Minister should give evidence if needed. Police are looking into claims Lord Mandelson passed on market-sensitive information to convicted paedophile Jeffrey Epstein. He was Gordon Brown's business secretary at the time in 2009. Kemi Badenoch's questioning how Sir Keir Starmer appointed him Britain's ambassador to the US.
He knew all of the allegations, concerns and reports about Peter Mandelson, knew that he was a close friend and associate of a convicted paedophile, and he still gave him the biggest job in the Foreign Office at a time when UK-US relations are at a critical point.
Well, earlier it was confirmed that Lord Mandelson will step down from the House of Lords tomorrow. Here's LBC's deputy political editor, Aggie Chambray.
The government was really keen, ministers were really keen, MPs really keen for him to essentially do this, to retire himself. They had talked about starting these sort of twin approaches, whereas yesterday they were saying that didn't seem like there was a way that they would be able to take the peerage from him.
Prince Edward's become the first member of the royal family to publicly comment on the latest Epstein files. The brother of the King and Andrew told an audience in Dubai that people should remember the victims. In other news this evening, there'll be a formal investigation into Elon Musk's X and its chatbot Grok by the Information Commissioner. It's looking at whether people's personal data was used illegally to create sexualised fake images of celebrities and underage girls. Plans to scrap the two-child benefit cap have passed the first test in the Commons. MPs backed the proposals with a majority of 354. The Tories and Reform voted to keep the cap in place. It will be further scrutinised by MPs and peers before it can become law. A 15-year-old boy has been charged with murder over the stabbing of another teenager in Wiltshire. Shane Hambakacher died in hospital after being attacked in Chippenham on Saturday. And HMRC estimates around 1 million people missed Saturday's deadline for filling in their self-assessment tax returns. There's an automatic £100 fine for those who don't send their forms back in time. In the city, the FTSE 100's closed down 26 points at 10,314. The pound buys $1.37 and €1.16. LBC weather, rain moving northwards, turning to snow on higher ground in Wales, the Pennines and eastern Scotland. Clearer further south with showers, lows of -1. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Daryl Jackson.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Iain Dale.
4 minutes past 9. Some breaking news. Downing Street says Sir Keir Starmer and Donald Trump have spoken this evening and have, quotes, agreed their governments would continue working closely to guarantee the future operation of the military base on Diego Garcia in the Chagos Islands. This follows Trump's recent criticism of the government's move to pass sovereignty of the territory to Mauritius, which is seen by Washington to be strongly influenced by the Chinese government. Well, I'm not sure that statement from Downing Street tells us anything at all, really. Is Donald Trump against the Chagos Islands deal? Because if he is, it can't actually progress. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes forward. Now, the Scottish Parliament has today rejected proposed legislation that would have criminalised the act of paying for sex. Soliciting in public, curb crawling and brothel keeping are illegal in Scotland, but paying for sex and arranging for it online are legal. The Prostitution, Offences and Support Scotland Bill, external, tabled by independent MSP Ash Regan, would have created a criminal offence for paying for sexual services and repealing the existing offence of soliciting. It was rejected by 64 votes to 54 with no abstentions. So the bill fell at its first stage when MSPs were asked to agree its general principles. Now, the SNP government did not support the bill, sparking a rebellion among a small group of SNP MSPs. While ministers said they supported the fundamental principle of the proposals, they argued the bill was too flawed to be passed before Holyrood splits up for May's elections. Now, Ash Regan said after the vote, today Parliament chose cowardice over action, despite overwhelming evidence, survivor testimony and support from police, prosecutors and international experts. Inaction is not neutral, it's a decision and it has consequences. Now, Mrs. Regan had sought to target the buyers of sexual services by creating a new offence of paying for sex acts. I mean, let's take that first as the first point of debate. I mean, that's done so the women who provide sexual services would not be criminalised, but the men who procure them from the women, although actually, of course, we have to accept that there are all sorts of different forms of paying for sex. It's not just men who pay women for sex. Men pay men for sex. Women pay men for sex. But, of course, predominantly it is men paying women. Why should that be illegal? Oh, I'm just asking for a friend. If two consenting adults come to some financial arrangement, I mean, you might say it's morally dubious to do that, but if both parties consent to the act, why should governmental authorities have a problem with that? I mean, if we're saying that we have to live by some religious moral creed and that should be what our government should reflect, well, fine. I mean, make that argument if you want. And I can understand that if you are a devoutly religious person, whether you're Christian, Muslim, whatever, you will find the act of paying for sex morally reprehensible. It would be a sin against God, I guess. So I get the logic of that. But for everyone else who isn't religious, who doesn't have any moral qualms about this sort of thing, why should the state intervene on what two people do in private? I mean, I recognise that's quite a controversial thing to say, but so many people do it. It's existed since time immemorial. I mean, you go back to ancient Egypt and prostitutes existed. And they exist today in every single country in the world. In every single country in the world, whatever its religious background, there are men, predominantly, who pay women for sex. Now, there are all sorts of reasons why this needs to be regulated, but surely that's the way forward. If we accept, as human beings, forget the religious side of this, if we accept as human beings that prostitution has always existed and it will always exist, then why on earth wouldn't we come to an understanding that, okay, we may disapprove of this in many ways, but it exists, so we therefore need to regulate it. That's what other countries do. I mean, I haven't got a list of countries where it's legal here, but certainly when I lived in Germany, all over the country, there would be buildings, often in rural areas in the middle of nowhere, and they would effectively be licensed brothels. And it seemed to work. I mean, this was a long time ago. But why can't we learn from what other countries do rather than just taking this sort of moralistic approach to say, no, we've got to make the men criminals for wanting to procure sex? Men have a sex drive, and men will find outlets for that sex drive. And some men will go to extremes to find outlets for that sex drive, and that can end up in a very, very horrible situation. So surely, as a responsible society, we need to come to an arrangement where these things can be properly regulated. And I'm not talking about exploiting women. I don't want any woman to be involved in this kind of activity who doesn't do it voluntarily. 0345 6060 973. Now, after MPs rejected these proposals this evening, LBC spoke with Ash Regan, who explained what she thinks her plans have achieved so far.
From what I've heard from organisations that work with survivors is they felt that through going through this process and actually standing up for them and telling the reality of what prostitution is like for many women and girls, it has given them a voice. Survivors have certainly had a voice through this process, perhaps in a way they haven't had for a very long time. And that has meant that many of them have made contact with services, maybe for the first time ever, to talk about what has happened to them. They want to organise and they want change. So I doubt this is the last the Scottish Parliament will have heard of this issue.
Well, let's talk to Audrey Jones from the Decrim Now campaign, which is made up of sex workers and their supporters. Audrey, very good evening to you. Thank you for coming on the programme. How would you want to change the laws in this country? And can you cite examples from other countries that we should maybe look at?
Yeah, for sure. So as part of our campaign and our campaign fits within a wider call globally from health organisations, human rights organisations such as Amnesty International, the World Health Organization, the National AIDS Trusts, when we're asking for the decriminalisation of sex work, because we recognise that any form of criminalisation of sex work, including the Nordic model, which is what Ash Reagan was proposing, actually increases sex workers' experiences of violence, their vulnerability to exploitation, and prohibits sex workers from being able to access support services, from going to the police if they do experience violence. So rather than legalisation, which we found in places like Germany creates a two-tier system where some people are still criminalised, we advocate for decriminalisation, which exists in countries like Belgium. And we've seen in countries like Belgium, when they've decriminalised sex work, what they've actually done is expanded labour rights and protections to better include sex workers. So sex workers can then take those labour rights and protections into their workplaces and also then work without fear of arrest and, better report violence if it happens to them.
So this idea that men should be effectively criminalised for trying to procure sex, you're wholly against that?
Yeah, because we found that in other countries where the Nordic model has been implemented, which is this system of criminalising the client, what often happens is that sex workers themselves are the primary targets still of those laws. So in the Republic of Ireland, Northern Ireland, they have the Nordic model. And, I think it was 70 or 80% of those people who were arrested under the Nordic model laws were migrant sex workers. Sex workers under the Nordic model still can't work together for safety because it's classed as a brothel, even without a manager present. Sex workers are more heavily surveilled by the police, so the police can then get to their clients, which leads to things like what happened in Norway, where there was an operation called Operation Homeless, and thousands of sex workers were made homeless because the police had surveilled them in an attempt to get their clients, and then gone and told their landlords that they were sex workers, and if they continued renting to those sex workers, then they could be done under the Nordic model laws for kind of facilitating or profiting from prostitution. So whilst criminalising the client on the surface might sound like a good idea, you can't criminalise the client without also in turn criminalising and impacting the sex worker. We saw in France, after the Nordic model, the same laws that Ash Reagan was trying to implement came in France. 10 sex workers were killed within the space of 6 months because they had to then work in more dangerous and more isolated areas in order to avoid the police who were coming for their clients. So you can't criminalise clients in a vacuum, essentially.
So effectively, the message there is, yes, safe regulation, but it's got to be the right kind of regulation, because sometimes regulation can actually have the law of unintended consequences.
Exactly. And under decriminalisation, what happens is that the sex workers themselves are the ones who have the power to challenge poor conditions, to challenge exploitation, instead of the state potentially coming in, feeling they have to rescue sex workers, and then in turn creating more harm. So we have this saying in the sex workers' rights movement of rights, not rescue. And under decriminalisation, sex workers will be able to utilise sort of labour rights, labour practices, and like all other workers do, if they do experience exploitation, if they do experience poor, bad bosses, poor working practices, they can utilise those labour rights and protections to challenge that. In New Zealand, another country where they have decriminalisation, a worker in a brothel actually took her brothel boss to an employment tribunal for sexual harassment, and she then won her case. So you can see in countries where they have decriminalisation how sex workers are able to use laws when they're given access to them to better their own conditions and organise and unionise for safety.
Has there ever been any surveys done about the percentage of women? I mean, I'm happy to introduce men into this conversation as well, because as you well know, there are many men who operate as sex workers too. What percentage are doing it because it's the only way they have of earning money to keep themselves afloat financially? What percentage do it because they just enjoy it and want to do it, and they're doing it voluntarily?
Yeah, so actually at Decrim Now, we did a study last year of sex workers to find out this kind of information. And we found that 76% of the sex workers that we surveyed enter sex work due to financial need. And then a further 55% of those sex workers surveyed actually entered sex work because they had to bridge the gap because they were in receipt of universal credit and found that universal credit was too little to live on. So what we find is that one of the main drivers of people entering sex work or making the choice to enter sex work isn't the demand, which is what people like Ash Reagan say it is, but it's actually due to kind of like poverty and financial need. And more so, it's because of the inaccessibility of the job market. For instance, many disabled people enter sex work because they can't work within full-time work, and part-time work is either too inflexible or pays too little. And the same goes for people with caring responsibilities. For single mothers, you find that these people are often overrepresented in sex work because it is their best option for them. So when it comes to the government making policies around sex work or trying to, lessen people's likelihood of going into sex work, what they actually need to target is poverty, or making a job market that's more accessible, of providing free childcare, providing better welfare for people, and, not punishing disabled people because they're unable to work traditional jobs. So if the government want to lessen people entering sex work, they actually need to look at their own policies, especially around kind of the financial state that people are working in right now. There was another 50% or so of sex workers, of people who were in sex work, who already have a full-time job. And they have to enter sex work to bridge that gap between their wages, which have stagnated for years, and the ever-growing cost of living. So it's these things that make or give people reason to enter sex work, as opposed to people being willing to buy services from sex workers.
And again, I'm going to ask you about a survey, because I don't know the answer. I should have done my research before the programme.
Problem.
But what percentage of adult males have ever used a sex worker?
I honestly don't know. And it's one of those things that I think is quite hard to find out, because due to the law surrounding sex workers are often quite isolated. They work in isolated ways, are often pushed quite, are maybe not out to their families, and don't have these sorts of open discussions around their working conditions, or, how many men come to see them, or how many people come to see them as clients. So it's really hard to tell. But I guess our main focus as an organisation, as a campaign group, is looking at, okay, sex work exists, people do buy services from sex workers, and sex workers sell services. It's going to continue to exist while poverty happens. And even if there was no poverty, some people would probably still choose to enter sex work because they want to do that. So our focus is, how do we reduce the harm to people who are in sex work, rather than trying to go for some sort of fantastical solution that we know will never work. In other countries where they have the Nordic model, or even further criminalisation of sex work still exists, because criminalisation doesn't and never will tackle the root causes of why people enter sex work.
Just finally, Laura sent in a text while you've been talking saying, I agree that sex workers provide a service without which there would be far more sex crimes. Now, that to me seems a very logical conclusion.
So I might actually disagree with that, because, sex workers themselves don't want to experience violence. Sex workers actually go to great lengths to not have to meet violent clients. There's ways and means that sex workers have to warn each other about who is violent, because, like any other worker, sex workers just want to be safe at work. And like any other human being, sex workers don't want to have even if sex work was decriminalised or legalised, preferably decriminalised, sex workers would still not want to see violent men. The reason that violent men, seem to target sex workers more than any other woman is because they believe that due to the law and due to the criminalisation surrounding sex workers will be unable to go to the police to report these crimes. And we've seen many times before that sex workers have often been amongst the first to report men or people who do commit a series of acts of violence against other women. And they often start with sex workers because due to the criminalisation, they think that sex workers won't be believed. So, I think that it's a dangerous thing to think that sex workers should somehow be sponges of violence.
I don't think that's what Laura meant, to be fair to her. I read that if sex workers did not exist, then some men would have no outlet for their sex drives, and therefore sex crimes might increase.
I don't know. I guess in my perspective, when I look at kind of sexual violence, I think that sexual violence is often less about the sex itself and that kind of act, and more so about the kind of power, and especially those kind of gendered power dynamics that happen within kind of instances of sexual violence. Like if we look at rape crimes, rape is not, the centre of rape isn't often someone's desire to have sex. It's someone's desire to assert power over someone else. So if we decriminalise sex work and we allow sex workers to act as all other workers do and access those same labour rights protections and human rights, then hopefully we'll see that that violent men won't go for sex workers either because they'll be protected.
Yeah. Audrey, we could talk for the next half an hour till the end of the programme, but I better get some calls on the board. Thank you very much indeed for speaking to us. That's Audrey Jones there from the campaign Decrim Now. So what do you think about this? Because to me, it seems perfectly logical, perfectly reasonable to legalise prostitution and make sure that it can be properly regulated. So anybody who works as a sex worker, whether they're male or female, is safe, is healthy, and the clients who use their facilities, and you can say use them because effectively they are, that they are safe and healthy as well. What is not to like about that? And I know there will be people listening who think, oh, this is very icky, and that why should we even be talking about this? Well, we talk about it because it exists. I think there are more people in this world that engage in this kind of activity than any of us might think. I'd quite like to hear from people involved in sex work, but also from people, whether you're male or female, who have used a sex worker. How do you think this whole area should be regulated? I realise that's a bit of an ask, but we can change your name, so don't worry about that. 0345 6060 973. It's 9:25.
This is LBC.
Okay.
Iain Dale. Call 0345 6060 973. Text 84850. Alexa, send a comment to LBC.
26 minutes past 9. Simple question. Should prostitution and sex work be legalised? Claire is in Nantwich. Hello, Claire.
Hi. Do you know what? It's really difficult. It's really difficult because I'm thinking, well, who are we to judge? Anyone, as in you, me, or anyone else, that a person is working within sex work. And
it's a human thing, though, isn't it, to judge? That's the problem.
Yeah, that is the problem. And my thinking is, well, if someone is in a position where they literally haven't got a choice, who are we to judge them when they've got to that point where they've had to go into that position? And why should we make them feel bad for what they've done?
Well, you're absolutely right in theory, but the human beings being what they are will always judge people who they feel to be somehow socially inferior to them. And if you're involved in sex work, I suppose that would be a definition of that, wouldn't it?
Yes, absolutely. And ultimately, there is the position that they didn't want to be in that position in the first place.
Well, as I was saying to Audrey, I don't know what the percentage would be of people who go into sex work, male or female, because it's something they feel that they either would enjoy or would be good at and could make a lot of money out of. I suspect most people, I think Audrey said this, do it because they've come to the conclusion it's the only way that they can keep their heads afloat financially.
And I think that's an amazing... That's absolutely right, because the point is, and this is men and women, that they will get to that point, potentially, women or men will get to that point and they feel like they need to do that. But there is also the point that some women or men do want to do that. And in that position, I say, well done to you.
I suppose the other thing is, I mean, we use these terms, either prostitution or sex work. But if you think about it, people who have OnlyFans channels, they are, I mean, OnlyFans is for all sorts of things, but I think predominantly sort of sex. People who do that, I mean, that isn't prostitution, but it is sex work, because you're basically people are paying to watch you either on your own or with somebody else. So, I mean, that's not prostitution, is it? But you're still making money out of sex.
I think it's a really good point. And, for example, I know it's like some of these programs make jokes about pictures of feet, for example. But I think it's a really good point.
Well, I think one thing you learn is that
bits and pieces.
There's a niche for everybody, isn't there, basically?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's the point of what you're comfortable with and making money out of. But I genuinely think that if women are doing it by choice, and that's the whole point I make about the conversation having this evening. And if they're doing it by choice and they're doing sex work by choice, then it should be legal.
Yeah, well, legal and properly regulated, because I think that's the key here. You can make something legal, but if you actually you could end up in a worse situation where more people are being exploited, more people are being abused, more people are being beaten up, and that would be the worst of all worlds. So I get from a politician's point of view, this is a really difficult thing. And that's why they never grasp it, because can you imagine putting on your election leaflet that, well, I would happily legalise prostitution. I actually think there'll be plenty of people who would agree with you, but it'd be a pretty brave thing to do, or courageous thing to do, as Sir Humphrey might say in Yes Minister. Claire, thank you very much. Phil says prostitution should 100% be legalised and controlled. It will never go away, and legalising it will only make it safer. It being illegal is simply head in the sand syndrome, and before anyone asks, it is not the same as the drugs debate. Well, I think there are actually similarities here, actually, because those people who advocate legalising drugs use a similar argument, saying, well, if you can regulate it, what's not to like? Because it'll be safer for the user. The people will pay tax on it. Similarly with prostitution and sex work. I mean, I've got no idea what the arrangements are with HMRC for something that is seen as not legal at the moment, but certainly the tax authorities would probably earn quite a lot of money if it was made legal. Right, we'll take more of your calls in a moment. 0345 6060 973. It's 9:32. Let's get the news headlines from Daryl Jackson.
A criminal investigation has been opened into allegations Lord Mandelson gave market-sensitive information to the paedophile financier Jeffrey Epstein. The former Labour minister's quitting the House of Lords tomorrow after emails in the Epstein files suggested he shared confidential details. A US Navy fighter jet has shot down an Iranian drone that was approaching its aircraft carrier in the Arabian Sea. It threatens to ramp up tensions as America warns of possible military action in Iran. And a 15-year-old boy has been charged with the murder of a 16-year-old in Wiltshire. Shane Ham-Bakachair was stabbed in Chippenham on Saturday. LBC weather, rain moving northwards, turning to snow on higher ground in Wales, the Pennines and eastern Scotland. Clearer further south with some showers, a low of -1.
This is LBC. Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
9:35 on LBC. We're talking about whether prostitution should be legalised, which I accept is not an issue that is top of the political agenda, but it has been in Scotland today. That is the news hook for this story, because the Scottish Parliament has rejected proposed legislation that would have criminalised the act of paying for sex. I mean, if I'd been in the Scottish Parliament, I would have absolutely voted against that. Why would you criminalise someone for doing that? I mean, if you believe that every single sex worker is doing it against their will and they're all being forced to, I can absolutely accept your reasoning for that. But that's not the case, is it? If two people are consenting adults and they wish to conduct a financial transaction between them, why should the state intervene with that? I don't understand that unless you just purely look at it from a moral point of view and you believe that sex should only be between two people who are married. Then, OK, you've probably got a case. But you're living in 1550, aren't you? Really, not 2026. Let's go to Sarah in West Worthing. Hello, Sarah.
Hello, Ian. Thanks for having me on. I completely agree with you on that front, actually. I can't believe we're even having a debate, actually. I think I really support decriminalisation. I have done for some time. For me, it's only a physical act at the end of the day that most people are already doing, that I would argue can be beneficial for health, including mental health. Probably.
Totally agree with you.
Yeah, I think there probably are studies that I can't reference, but I think that, it's very good for well-being, and everybody, or most people, would appreciate having that closeness, and maybe there are barriers to them having that for several reasons, many that even, lots of us wouldn't have even considered. I just wanted to call in because I was a bit concerned about the correlation between men with high sex drives to an escalation of criminal, abusive or violent behaviour towards others if they can't access sex easily. It's just, going back to things that I remember learning about years ago, in my opinion, from what I remember, I think usually men who escalate in those behaviours, it's not about sex so much, it's more about control, power and violence. So I do think that, regulation, as you said, I agree with you again, that could go on to protect sex workers from exploitation, not prevent it, but it will make it easier to prevent, or at least to go on to prosecute.
I think Audrey, our guest earlier, she was saying that in Germany, though I'd said to me, it was 40 years ago when I lived there, so maybe things are very different now. But they've got what she calls a two-tier system. So they have got a legal system. But I think what she was saying is that underground prostitution, if we can call it that, still exists. And that's sort of the worst of all worlds, isn't it? It's a bit like if we legalised cannabis, but the legalised version of cannabis was so weak that nobody ever really wanted to take it, and they would still go to the black market for the stronger version. So I think you can sort of relate that debate to this one.
You can. I think you will never eradicate these underground, worlds. But I think maybe if there are people who want to access sex on a respectful level, given the choice, they could do it that way through legalised routes, regulated routes. And maybe we could be reducing the need for that underground market, perhaps, and giving people who want to engage in it as a client the option, maybe not to deviate, or to just go without if they, have barriers to accessing it. It could be social, it could be anything like divergence in the connect with people on that level, and actually to be able to enjoy part that a lot of other people can access easily on that front. It would give them an opportunity to not have to be dragged into an underground world.
I think also it's important to get away from the stereotype of what sex work actually is, because over the years on this station, I've talked to, I won't say numerous sex workers, but sort of quite a few. And I remember one woman in particular told me that she said, look, what you've got to understand is, yes, we do have clients who are basically just randy men, but we also provide what she described as a social service, where they provide sex for maybe older people who maybe their wives have died and they can't just sort of meet anybody, or disabled people as well, because everyone, people find this subject sort of quite a difficult one to discuss, but believe it or not, disabled people have sexual urges too.
Absolutely, and it's comforting. And you took the words out of my mouth.
It must have been while you were kissing me, Sarah. For those who don't know, that is a Meatloaf lyric, before you think I've gone all pervy.
I can hear it now as you said it. I can hear it playing. brilliant. But yeah, I was literally thinking, but just before you said it, of hairdressers. Hairdressers aren't just hairdressers. Me personally, I have a hairdresser. She has been like a therapist.
Yeah.
It's a whole holistic experience of going to see her. It's everything she does. It's not just that she's cutting my hair. So I'll find an excuse to go. So, even if my hair doesn't need doing. So I think, for me, it's just another,
Well, sadly, I don't have that experience any longer. As a DIY job. Sarah, thank you very much. Eddie says prostitution is not illegal. Nobody has ever been charged with being a prostitute. It's what's around it that's illegal, solicitation, etc. That is... I know what you're saying there, but that is splitting hairs a bit, isn't it? Let's go to Joe, who's in Wandsworth. Hello, Joe.
Yes, hello, good evening.
Hi.
I suppose you're putting it in a very clinical way, two consenting adults that decide that they're going to have an exchange of money for sex. But that's a big power imbalance, isn't it? I am going to give you this amount of money because I can afford it. So you will do all and anything that I want you to do. And I also think that around prostitution, there is a lot of other criminality that goes on.
Yeah, that's right.
A lot of drug taking. So that's how I think the drug debate and this debate are very, linked.
But it doesn't have to be like that, does it? I mean, the point I'm making is that just because it's like that now, if it was properly regulated, it needn't be like that.
Look, I think ultimately, Ian, it's a very hedonistic experience. And some people, I'm not saying that all and every exchange that a prostitute makes with a client will include drugs, right? But it is around that kind of world, yeah? And I've watched sort of certain things, these not 60 Minutes, this I work as a sex worker and this is what really happens type things on YouTube. And they said, you are expected to provide a complete experience. Again, this is not all sex workers. That will include the sex and the drugs that they want provided. So the two are very closely linked. Yeah, as you say, it's been going on for centuries, and you could say that there is a need for it for certain people. But I still think it's a very exploitative thing, and who generally, and again, very linked to poverty, as your other contributor said, and very linked to addiction. So, people that are in poverty, and some of them may be addicted as well, they're quite vulnerable people, aren't they?
Yes, they absolutely can be.
Right.
But not all of them.
No,
and so if you had a system that where this whole thing was regulated, you're never going to eliminate violence in sex work. You're never going to be able to stop total exploitation, because there will always be some underground networks. Because let's say for example that where are you in Wandsworth? If some enterprising local business person set up what the Germans call bunny bars, set one up in Wandsworth, and it was known locally as the place to go to have sex with a sex worker, right, you would get a lot of people doing that, but there would also be people who think, what if someone recognises me? No, I can't possibly go in there. And so there would always be this sort of furtive underground aspect to it, and that's where the danger really occurs, isn't it?
Well, that's where a pair of false glasses, a false nose and a beard comes in. Very handy.
So I don't know why I just thought of President Macron then, but...
Oh, stop.
Oh, Joe. Well, you do make some really interesting points. I mean, I have no idea how sort of intertwined the sex work and drugs trade are. There's obviously an overlap.
It's about hedonism, the whole thing, isn't it? I'm going to have maybe a crazy experience with this person, and I can do all the things that I've ever dreamt about because I'm paying to do it. And maybe I want that to include other sort of very hedonistic things. They are very closely linked. Again, I'm not saying with every exchange that a prostitute has with a client, but a lot of these drugs are used to enhance that, aren't they? To enhance the sexual experience.
Apparently so.
Oh, no, of course you have no personal experience of this, but you've heard.
I have heard. I mean, I can't imagine anything worse than taking drugs to do that. It just seems to me to complete anathema. But then people have different tastes, don't they?
They do. They certainly do, Ian. And I guess this is why, you know, I wouldn't want to judge somebody harshly for doing this, but I do think that there are a lot of very vulnerable people around this business. And unfortunately, people that, well, I'm using a very well-known example, and again, she wouldn't represent anyone, but, you know, Virginia Defray, her book, you know, she was basically groomed from when she was a very young child.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, it was almost, how would you put it, something she was almost kind of conditioned to do.
Well, I think you make a very good point there, because if you look at a lot of there is apparently a real trade, and I hate using the word, but it is a trade in very young Eastern European sex workers who effectively have been groomed to do it from a very, very young age, an age that we probably wouldn't even want to contemplate. Joe, thank you very much indeed. More of your calls in a second. Should prostitution be legalised? It's 9:47.
Coming up at 10 on LBC, Ben Kentish.
Confirmation today that the police will investigate Peter Mandelson. So how big a problem is this becoming for the Labour government? Plus, why ministers want to make the British countryside less white.
Ben Kentish at 10. Listen on our free Global Player app or the LBC app.
Octopus.
Dale on LBC.
It's 10 to 10 on LBC. There's a new episode of the Where Politics Meets History podcast where Tessa and I talk quite a bit about Peter Mandelson, as you might imagine, so you can download that wherever you get your podcasts. And the latest episode of the All Talk podcast is with my colleague Henry Riley, which everybody's saying what a great conversation it was. You know, because Henry is, should we say, quite young as a presenter. I thought, God, if I can eat 40 minutes out of this, I'll have done well. We ended up, what was it, about 80 minutes, I think, that we did. So Do find that wherever you get your podcasts from. Right, Ian says, you said that highly sexed men would be tempted to attack women. No, I don't think I did say that, because that's not what I believe. Do you think that such men are more likely to randomly beat up male strangers, i.e. the Saturday nights for fighting, to quote Elton John? No. I'm not quite sure what point you're trying to make there, Ian, if I'm honest. Chris is in Brighton. Hello, Chris.
Oh, hi there, Ian. Long-time listener, first-time caller.
Well, welcome.
Thank you. I believe sex workers should be protected. I think largely they're typically female, but there are men as well. And perhaps they should be self-employed. So here's the issue. Now, I mean, this goes over to this last weekend. What happens when all those sex workers have to do their tax returns? There's going to be a bit of an issue.
Why?
Because they'll be too busy doing their tax returns. There'll be lots of frustrated customers.
I'm assuming you're joking.
Oh, it's a point, isn't it? Anyway, nice show, and nice to speak to you.
Okay, is that really the point you wanted to make, Chris?
Well, it's practicality, isn't it?
All right, okay, thank you. Right, Jodie says, Ian, just a thought on legalising prostitution. It's basically so they can earn some money to pay tax, so the HMRC are better off. But what coincides with prostitution, violent men, pimps and drugs? They might not be happy doing it, but that's their only way of earning any money. And here's another one, which is from Roy. You've done it again, Ian. I settled down for an early one with LBC in the background, and you choose such an interesting last hour that I'm sitting up, radio turned up. Great show as usual. You've fallen for my evil plan, Roy. Let's go to Jim in Lincoln. Hello, Jim.
Evening, Ian. Good to speak to you again. Just a couple of things. I mean, first of all, I'm absolutely with you. I find it quite bizarre that the state can sort of legislate between two consenting adults. One wants to provide sex, the other wants to pay for it in the privacy of private residence. I don't really see how the state gets involved in that. I find that just bizarre. But taking the moral argument, for me, it goes totally out of the window because, and I'm very conscious of not name-checking her or giving her any publicity or airtime, but you have the likes of Bonnie Blue going around performing, albeit a different kind of sex work. Maybe there's no money being exchanged between.
Well, no, because she makes her money off OnlyFans, or I have no idea whether she's still on it or whether they banned her or whatever. But that's how she makes her money.
That's not on. No, correct, but that is not private. I mean, that's constantly, in the media, all over the internet, and all the rest of it. It's far more accessible than two consenting adults in a private residence. So the moral argument doesn't stack up. But having that, quite frankly, outdated moral view of sex work or prostitution. The biggest sort of question I've got is how many sex workers have been harmed or unfortunately killed because of that that outdated view. Because if it was regulated and there were, safe brothels, for want of a better term, it would take that underground sort of seediness, if you will, the sort of danger side away from it. Because again, the very point, the principle of I want to purchase sex, well, I'm selling it. Okay, well, let's come to some arrangement and off you go. If that whole sort of underground thing is just taking away from it, and it's now legal and regulated, and there's better protections, how many lives in the past could it have saved, and how many lives in the future will it save?
Well, we'll never know, but I think we probably both agree that it would be quite a few. Thank you very much, Jim. Let's go to Mary, who's in Croydon. Hello, Mary.
Hello, Ian. It's just a point on what you were discussing. I've been to Australia a few times on holiday, but it would have been 10 years ago my last time. But the prostitution is legal there, and the girls are given a place like an ordinary house, very big, obviously. There's a nurse on duty, a male nurse always. I don't know because I wasn't in them, but this is what I was told. They also pay their taxes, and they usually use the same accountant so that they get a fair deal. But they have to see a doctor every month. I think that's very reasonable.
And are those sort of regulations done by the local state government?
Yes.
So if they can do, I mean, I don't know anything about Australia in that regard, but if they can do it there, and there'll be lots of other countries where it probably works quite well. I don't understand why we seem unable to learn from other countries in this regard, maybe other regards too.
Well, when you think, especially, in the last 20 years, how many women or men were hurt or even killed, and you never hear it in Australia. It just doesn't happen there. That's what they said to me.
Well, that's good to hear. Thank you very much. Right, quick call from Keith in Upminster. Keith, we haven't got long.
I understand that, Ian. Okay, do you remember back in the coalition back in the 2010s that job centres were actually advertising sex worker roles?
No.
Yes. You look at us, actually sent you a WhatsApp with a link. It was something that was happening under the coalition government in the 2010s.
See, even I might draw the line at that. I mean,
job centres, obviously it wasn't, full-on prostitution, but it was definitely they were advertising some sex-related worker roles in the 2010s in job centres.
Well, that is quite fascinating. I mean, how on earth... I mean, they couldn't force people to take those... Well, you see, there's all sorts of moral quandaries there, aren't there?
It was just after the financial crash, wasn't it? 2008, 9, 10 sort of period. But I sent you the link on WhatsApp so you can have a look at it.
Okay, well... Keith, thank you very much indeed. Well, that's something I didn't know. Well, thank you for all of your calls and messages this evening, a rather varied programme. I'll be back tomorrow from 7. If you missed any of this evening's show, you can listen back on our free Global Player app or the LBC app, where you can stay up to date with all the latest news, videos and opinion. Download the official LBC app for free from your app store right now. Coming up at 1 on LBC, it's Richard Spur. But right now, Ben Kentish.
Ian, thank you very much indeed. Hello there. A very good evening to you this Tuesday night on the show.
He was sacked as the ambassador because of the revelations. More decisive action should have actually happened. We shouldn't have had to wait.
Confirmation today that the Metropolitan Police will investigate Peter Mandelson over allegations he leaked confidential, market-sensitive government documents to his pal Jeffrey Epstein. Keir Starmer expressing his outrage about the man that he, only 18 months ago, made our ambassador to the United States. He says the Mandelson saga reflects badly on all politicians. But is that how you see it? Or is the Prime Minister just trying to deflect the blame here and share it around? You might think that this lays squarely on the shoulders of Keir Starmer. So tell me, how big a problem is the Mandelson scandal for the Labour government?
On your radio, on the LBC app, and...
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 10 o'clock, a criminal investigation's been launched into allegations Lord Peter Mandelson passed market-sensitive information to the paedophile financier Jeffrey Epstein. The former Labour minister's quitting the House of Lords tomorrow after emails in the Epstein files suggested he shared confidential details. Sir Keir Starmer says it is the right move as Lord Mandelson let his country down. Lib Dem leader Sir Ed Davey says there should be an inquiry into Lord Mandelson's appointment as ambassador to the US.
Well, there'll be senior civil servants, people in number 10, the Prime Minister's chief advisor, Morgan McSweeney, and there may be others, to make sure people who have really done our country a disservice are held to account.
Prince Edward's become the first member of the royal family to comment on the latest Epstein revelations.
It's all really important always to remember the victims and who are the victims in all this. A lot of victims in this.
He was speaking on CNN during a summit in Dubai. In other news, a 15-year-old boy has been charged with the murder of a 16-year-old in Wiltshire. Shane Hambaka-Chair was stabbed in Chippenham on Saturday. Earlier, his father paid tribute to a brave and bold young